36,000 years before Luke Skywalker ever held a lightsaber, 8 mysterious ships appeared across the galaxy and changed everything. To understand the Old Republic's rise and fall, we need to start here, at the very beginning of Force users in galactic history. Picture this. You're a Force-sensitive being living your life on some distant world when suddenly, without warning, a massive pyramid-shaped vessel descends from the sky. These weren't ordinary ships. They were the Tho-Yor, ancient constructs that seemed to possess their own consciousness. Nobody knows who built them or where they came from. What we do know is that they had a mission. These vessels traveled to 8 different worlds across the galaxy. On Ando Prime, they gathered the Dai Bendu monks. From other planets, they collected Force-sensitive individuals who had been studying this mysterious energy field connecting all living things. These weren't random selections. The Tho-Yor chose specific people, pilgrims who showed promise in understanding what would later be called the Force. All 8 ships converged on a single destination, Tython, a world rich with Force energy, where space itself seemed to pulse with power. When the pilgrims arrived, they found something remarkable. Tython had 2 moons that perfectly represented the dual nature of the Force. Ashla, embodying serenity and peace. Bogan, representing passion and strength. Light and dark in perfect balance above their heads. The pilgrims who stepped off those ships around 36,000 BBY had no idea they were founding the oldest Force-using tradition in galactic history. They called themselves the Jedi Order. That extra letter might seem small, but it represented something huge. These early Force users believed in balance above all else. They didn't see light and dark as enemies, but as 2 sides of the same cosmic truth. The Jedi built their civilization around the 8 Tho-Yor, using the ancient ships as foundations for temple cities. Each vessel became the center of learning and community. At the heart of it all, they constructed the Temple of Balance at Akar Kesh. This wasn't just a building. It was a statement of philosophy made in stone and metal. For over 10,000 years, this system worked beautifully. The Jedi developed techniques for using both aspects of the Force. They understood that anger and passion could be powerful tools when balanced with serenity and compassion. If someone fell too far toward either extreme, they would be sent to the appropriate moon for contemplation. Too aggressive? Off to Ashla to learn peace. Too passive? Bogan would teach them strength. This golden age saw the Jedi become masters of Force abilities that would amaze even later generations. They could move objects with their minds, sense the future, and heal wounds that should have been fatal. But they also developed more subtle skills, meditation techniques that could calm conflicts, diplomatic methods that resolved disputes before they became wars. They were scholars, philosophers, and peacekeepers rolled into one. Change had been brewing across the galaxy for millennia. The Rakata had been spreading across the galaxy since around 35,000 years earlier, building their infinite empire. The Rakata were a species that had discovered something the Jedi would have found horrifying. These beings learned to power their technology using the dark side of the Force. Their ships, weapons, and civilization ran on channeled anger and hatred. The Rakata built an empire spanning thousands of worlds. They enslaved entire species, treating other beings like livestock. Their Force-powered technology gave them advantages that made resistance seem impossible. World after world fell to their hunger for conquest and domination. It was only a matter of time before they discovered Tython. A Rakatan scout named Zesh, one of their Force hounds trained to hunt Force-sensitive individuals, stumbled upon the Jedi homeworld. What he found there both fascinated and threatened the Rakata. Here was a civilization of Force users who had never been conquered or enslaved. The Jedi faced their first real test. The Rakata attacked with ships powered by dark side energy, weapons that channeled hatred into destructive force. The peaceful scholars of Tython found themselves forced to fight for survival. But the Jedi had advantages the Rakata hadn't expected. Tython itself was a nexus of force power. The planet responded to their call for help. Even more surprising, the ancient Thoyor ships awakened from their long slumber. These mysterious vessels revealed hidden capabilities, firing beams of pure force energy that could tear apart Rakatan warships. The Jedi repelled the invasion, but victory came with a terrible cost. Using the Force for warfare, even in self-defense, began to upset the careful balance they had maintained for millennia. Some Jedi found themselves drawn to the darker emotions that combat required. Others became so committed to peace that they refused to fight even when necessary. The seeds of conflict had been planted. For the first time in their history, the Jedi began to question their fundamental beliefs. If balance was truly the answer, why had they been forced to embrace one side of the Force to survive? These doubts would fester for thousands of years. The breaking point came during political upheaval in the Tython system. Queen Hadia of Shikakwa, a neighboring world, decided to conquer her system and unite it under her rule. This sparked the Despot War, as Jedi forces led by Baron Volnos Rio mobilized to defend their independence. The Jedi won the Battle of Tython, defeating Queen Hadia's forces and preserving their freedom. But the experience of organized warfare had changed them. The philosophical debates that had once been academic became personal. Those who had fought in the war understood the power that came from embracing emotion and passion. Others who had stayed behind to protect the temples argued that violence only led to more violence. These disagreements might have remained civil discussions if not for charismatic leaders on both sides. Dagon Locke became the voice of those who believed the Jedi needed to embrace the strength that came from passion and emotion. His followers argued that the Bogan teachings offered power that could protect the innocent and defeat evil. On the other side, those who favored the Ashlar path believed that peace and serenity were the only responsible ways to use the Force. They saw Locke's followers as dangerous extremists who threatened everything the Jedi had built. These philosophical differences exploded into open warfare. The Force Wars had begun. For 10 years, former allies fought each other across Tython's surface. Followers of Bogan battled followers of Ashla in conflicts that tore apart families and devastated communities. This wasn't like the earlier war against the Rakata or Queen Hadia. This was brother fighting brother, student fighting teacher. The fabric of Jedi society unraveled as Force users turned their abilities against each other. Temples were destroyed. Ancient knowledge was lost. The careful balance that had sustained Tython for over 10,000 years collapsed completely. The end came in a single terrible moment. The final confrontation between the two factions triggered something incredible. A massive Force storm, later called the Force Cataclysm, erupted across Tython's surface. The planet's force nexuses, corrupted by years of conflict, released their energy in a wave of destruction that devastated the world. When the storm finally passed, Tython lay in ruins. The survivors, mostly those who had followed the Ashla path, looked at the devastation and understood that their old way of life was finished. The balance they had tried to maintain had proven impossible to sustain. When push came to shove, they had been forced to choose a side. In the aftermath, the survivors made a decision that would echo through the next 25,000 years of galactic history. They would abandon the Jedi way completely. No more attempts at balance, no more studying both light and dark. They would dedicate themselves entirely to the light side of the Force and guard against the dark side's corruption. They dropped the second letter from their name, becoming simply the Jedi. This wasn't just a cosmetic change. It represented a fundamental shift in philosophy. Where the Jedi had seen light and dark as equal aspects of truth, the Jedi would view the dark side as a corruption to be resisted at all costs. The new Jedi Order gathered what knowledge they could salvage from Tython's ruins and departed their homeworld. They established their first enclave on Ossus, far from the devastated planet that had taught them such a painful lesson. Masters like Rajavari and Garanjard formed the first Jedi Council, creating the leadership structure that would guide the Order for millennia to come. This transformation marked the end of the dawn of the Jedi period. The Force users who had once sought to balance light and dark had learned that such balance was ultimately impossible. From this point forward, the Jedi would stand as guardians of the light, always watching for signs of the dark side's return. But the destruction of the Jedi Order taught another lesson that would prove equally important. The dark side didn't need an external enemy to corrupt Force users. It could grow from within, turning allies into enemies and students into threats. Why does this matter for understanding the Old Republic? Because everything that happened in the millennia that followed stems from this moment. The Jedi Order that would help found the Republic, fight its wars, and ultimately contribute to its destruction was born from the ashes of a civilization that believed in balance. When that balance failed, the Jedi chose to reject half of the Force entirely. That choice would shape every conflict, every alliance, and every betrayal that followed. The stage was now set for the next chapter. The Jedi had been born from the ashes of the Jedi, carrying with them both ancient wisdom and fresh scars. They would need both as they faced the challenges that lay ahead in a galaxy full of conflict, ambition, and the ever-present temptation of the dark side. From the mysterious arrival of the Thoyor to the founding of the Jedi Order, this period established patterns that would repeat throughout galactic history. The struggle between different philosophies of Force use, the difficulty of maintaining balance in times of crisis, the way that external threats could expose internal divisions, and most importantly, the idea that sometimes destruction was necessary for something new and better to be born. The Jedi were gone, but their legacy lived on in the Jedi who carried their knowledge to Ossus. What began with 8 ships and a dream of balance would continue with a new order dedicated to the light, ready to face whatever darkness the galaxy might throw at them. And that darkness was coming sooner than anyone expected. A plague saved the galaxy. Centuries after the Jedi fled their ruined homeworld, the seemingly unstoppable Infinite Empire collapsed overnight when disease stripped the Rakata of their Force abilities. Here's what happened. The Rakata had built their empire on a foundation of dark side-powered technology. Their ships, weapons, and entire civilization depended on channeling hatred and anger through the Force. When a mysterious plague swept through Rakata Prime, it didn't just make them sick, it severed their connection to the Force completely. Imagine being a slave on a Rakata world when news arrives that your masters can no longer use their Force powers. The technology keeping you enslaved stops working. The weapons pointed at your head go silent. Across thousands of worlds, enslaved species rose up against their former oppressors. The infinite empire shattered in a matter of years. This created a power vacuum that changed everything. With the Rakata gone, civilized worlds throughout the core finally had breathing room to organize themselves. Representatives from Corellia, Alderaan, Coruscant, and the Duros homeworld gathered to discuss a radical idea. What if they formed an alliance based on cooperation instead of conquest? Around 25,000 BBY, these representatives signed the Galactic Constitution, officially founding the Galactic Republic with Coruscant as its capital. This represented a revolutionary approach to galactic governance. Instead of one species dominating others, the Republic would be built on the idea that different worlds could work together for mutual benefit. The timing couldn't have been better. Corellian scientists had spent decades studying captured Rakata technology, particularly their hyperdrive systems. While they couldn't replicate the dark side-powered engines, they figured out how to build safer, more reliable hyperdrives that didn't require Force sensitivity to operate. This breakthrough made galactic travel accessible to ordinary beings for the first time. The Republic immediately began what historians call the expansionist era. New hyperlanes opened up trade routes that connected distant worlds. The Ptolemean trade route linked Coruscant to the Tion cluster, passing through Ossus, where the Jedi had established their new home. The Corellian run connected the industrial worlds of the core to resource-rich planets in the colony's region. Peaceful trade suddenly became more profitable than conquest. Merchants could travel safely between worlds knowing that Republic laws protected them. Different species began working together, sharing technology and knowledge instead of fighting over territory. It was a golden age of cooperation and growth. But the Republic had a problem. They were excellent at building trade networks and diplomatic agreements, but they had no military force to protect what they'd built. When conflicts arose, they relied on planetary defense forces or hired mercenaries. This worked fine for dealing with pirates or small disputes, but what would happen if they faced a real threat? Around this time, Republic scouts exploring the Outer Rim discovered something remarkable. On Ossus, an order of warrior monks had built a thriving community dedicated to studying the Force and maintaining peace. These Jedi, descendants of the Jedi survivors, had spent the past 700 years developing their abilities and refining their philosophy. The first contact between the Republic and the Jedi came when Jedi Master Haune Tia met with Republic diplomats. The negotiations took weeks, but eventually the Jedi agreed to something that would change galactic history. They would serve as guardians of peace in the Republic, using their abilities to protect innocent beings and resolve conflicts peacefully. This partnership worked better than anyone expected. The Jedi brought something the Republic desperately needed. They were incorruptible peacekeepers who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Their Force abilities made them incredibly effective at resolving disputes and protecting civilians. Plus, their dedication to the light side meant they would never use their power for personal gain. The Jedi established a temple on Ossus as their primary base, but they also created a presence on Coruscant to work closely with Republic leadership. They developed new technologies to support their mission, including the protosaber, an early lightsaber that used an external power pack connected by cable. These weapons became symbols of Jedi authority and their commitment to defending the innocent. As the Republic expanded, so did the Jedi Order. They established academies on worlds like Dantooine, spreading their knowledge and training new generations of Force users. They researched better ways to use their abilities, always focusing on protection and peacekeeping rather than conquest. By 20,000 BBY, Jedi engineers had perfected the lightsaber, creating fully self-contained weapons that would become legendary. But expansion brought challenges. The Republic's growth put them in conflict with existing power structures throughout the galaxy. In the Tian cluster, a warlord named Jim the Despot had built his own empire based on slavery and conquest. For the next 100 years, Jim waged war against the Hutt Empire, another powerful faction that controlled trade routes in the Outer Rim. The Republic initially tried to stay out of this conflict, but they couldn't ignore what was happening. Jim's forces were enslaving entire populations and disrupting the trade routes that the Republic depended on. When diplomacy failed, the Republic found itself drawn into the war. The conflict ended at the Third Battle of Von Tor, where Jim was finally defeated. But this wasn't a Republic victory. The battle was won by the Hutts, who used their victory to expand their own criminal empire. The Republic learned an important lesson. Staying neutral wasn't always possible when faced with threats to galactic peace. Over the following centuries, the Republic continued to grow. New species joined the alliance, bringing their own cultures and technologies. The Corellians became master shipbuilders. The Alderaanians developed advanced communication systems. The humans of Coruscant created governmental structures that could accommodate thousands of different worlds and species. The Jedi Order grew alongside the Republic, but they faced their own challenges. As they spread to new worlds and took on more responsibilities, philosophical differences began to emerge within their ranks. Some Jedi believed they should take a more active role in galactic affairs. Others argued that they should focus purely on studying the Force and maintaining their spiritual discipline. These tensions came to a head when a charismatic Jedi Knight named Zendor began questioning the Council's restrictions on Force study. Zendor was brilliant and powerful, but he chafed under rules that prohibited research into certain techniques. He believed the Jedi were limiting themselves unnecessarily, and that exploring all aspects of the Force would make them better protectors. Zendor found support among other Jedi who shared his frustrations, including his lover Arden Lin. Together, they began studying forbidden texts and experimenting with techniques that the Council had banned. They called themselves researchers, but what they were really doing was exploring the dark side of the Force. When Zendor requested permission to establish an academy dedicated to dark side research, the Council refused. They remembered the lessons of Tython, where attempts to balance light and dark had led to civil war and devastation. The dark side was too dangerous to study safely. It corrupted those who touched it, turning protectors into conquerors. Zendor didn't accept this decision. Instead, he gathered his followers and formally broke away from the Jedi Order. They called themselves the Legions of Letau and declared war on their former comrades. This became known as the First Great Schism, the first time Jedi had fought against other Jedi since the Force Wars on Tython. The conflict spread across the core worlds as Xendor's dark legions battled traditional Jedi forces. These weren't the philosophical debates that had divided the Jedi. This was open warfare between those who embraced the dark side and those who rejected it. Families were torn apart. Communities were destroyed. The Republic watched in horror as their protectors turned against each other. The war reached its climax on the world of Columbus, where Xendor made his final stand. In a lightsaber duel that became legendary, the fallen Jedi was killed by loyal Order members. His death broke the spirit of his followers, but the conflict wasn't over yet. Arden Lyn continued the fight, driven by grief and rage over her lover's death. The end came when Jedi Master Odrista Pina confronted Arden Lyn directly. Using a force technique called Morichro, Pina was able to slow Lyn's bodily functions to the point where her heart stopped. With their leaders dead, the legions of Letau scattered, ending the First Great Schism. The aftermath of this conflict changed the Jedi Order forever. They established formal rules about what could and couldn't be studied. They created oversight structures to prevent future schisms. Most importantly, they reinforced their absolute prohibition against dark side practices. The Order had learned that even small compromises with darkness could lead to catastrophic consequences. In the wake of the schism, the Republic entered what historians call the Great Manifest period. This was an age of incredible expansion and growth that lasted for nearly 20,000 years. The Republic pushed its borders out to the Mid-Rim, incorporating hundreds of new worlds and species. The Jedi Order also formalized its structure during this period. They established the Jedi Council on Ossus as their governing body and created a comprehensive code that emphasized serenity, restraint, and absolute dedication to the light side. These rules might have seemed restrictive, but they were born from hard experience with the consequences of moral compromise. As the Republic expanded, it faced periodic challenges that tested both its institutions and its Jedi protectors. The Taiwanese War saw the Republic fighting against remnants of Jim's empire who refused to accept the new Galactic Order. Through all these challenges, the Jedi served as stabilizing forces. They mediated disputes between species, protected trade routes from pirates, and provided moral guidance to Republic leadership. Their reputation grew with each successful mission until they became legendary throughout the galaxy. New hyperlanes continued to open up trade and communication. The Hydian Way connected the core worlds to distant regions that had never been part of galactic civilization. Each new route brought opportunities for trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of Republic values. But expansion also brought new responsibilities. The Republic had to govern worlds with completely different cultures, environments, and needs. Some species were naturally aggressive and had to be carefully integrated. Others were so peaceful that they needed protection from their more militant neighbors. The challenge of creating unity while respecting diversity would define Republic politics for millennia. The Jedi Order faced similar challenges as they established academies on new worlds. Each planet had its own relationship with the Force, its own traditions of spirituality and combat. The Jedi had to learn to work with these differences while maintaining their core principles. By the end of this period, both the Republic and the Jedi Order had become galactic institutions. The Republic had grown from a small alliance of core worlds into a government spanning much of known space. The Jedi had evolved from a small order of survivors into legendary peacekeepers whose very presence could prevent wars. The partnership between these two organizations had proven incredibly successful. The Republic provided the Jedi with resources and authority to carry out their mission. The Jedi gave the Republic moral legitimacy and protection against threats both external and internal. Together, they had created a period of peace and prosperity that lasted for millennia. But this golden age was about to face its greatest test. Hidden in the unknown regions, descendants of the ancient Sith had been growing in power and patience. They remembered the defeats their ancestors had suffered and were preparing for revenge. The stage was being set for conflicts that would shake the Republic to its foundations and test whether the partnership between democracy and the Force could survive. The early Republic period established patterns that would define galactic civilization for the next 25,000 years. The idea that different species could cooperate as equals, the belief that trade and diplomacy were better than conquest, the role of Force users as protectors rather than rulers. All these concepts grew from the ashes of the Infinite Empire and the wisdom gained from the Jedi's destruction. As we move forward in our story, remember that everything that follows builds on these foundations. The Republic's strengths and weaknesses, the Jedi's power and blind spots, the eternal tension between order and freedom. All of it traces back to these early centuries when survivors and dreamers worked together to build something better than what came before. Some mistakes echo for thousands of years. In this case, a group of Jedi made a decision that would spawn the greatest enemy the galaxy has ever known. Picture a research facility somewhere in Republic space. Jedi scholars hunched over ancient texts trying to understand the deepest mysteries of the Force. These weren't your typical peacekeepers. They were intellectuals, scientists, philosophers who believed knowledge should never be forbidden. And they had a dangerous question. What if the dark side could be used for good? These researchers had spent decades pushing boundaries. They experimented with Force alchemy, trying to create new life forms that could serve the Republic. They studied Sith artifacts recovered from ancient battlefields, believing they could unlock secrets that would make them better protectors. They convinced themselves that understanding darkness would help them fight it more effectively. The Jedi Council watched these experiments with growing alarm. They had seen this story before. Curious researchers becoming obsessed with forbidden knowledge. Gradual moral compromises leading to complete corruption. The path these scholars were walking had been traveled before, and it always led to the same destination. When the Council ordered the research to stop, the scholars refused. They had gone too far to turn back now. They believed they were on the verge of breakthroughs that could revolutionize how the Force was used. More importantly, they had already been changed by their experiments. The dark side had touched them, and like a poison in their bloodstream, it had begun to alter their thinking. Around this time, these researchers made their choice. They openly defied the Jedi Council and declared their intention to continue their work regardless of consequences. But this wasn't just academic rebellion. They had followers throughout the Order. Other Jedi who shared their curiosity about forbidden knowledge. What started as a research dispute became the Second Great Schism. The galaxy was about to learn what the Jedi had discovered on Tython thousands of years earlier. The dark side doesn't stay contained. It spreads like a virus, corrupting everything it touches, and once it takes hold, it transforms protectors into predators. The war that followed lasted 100 years and earned its name from the darkness it brought to the galaxy. The 100-year darkness wasn't just about the length of the conflict. It was about what the fallen Jedi became and what they unleashed upon innocent worlds. Leading the rebellion were powerful Jedi who had become something else entirely. Ajunta Pal, once a respected researcher, now commanded dark energies that could wither entire forests. Xosan, a former healer, twisted her knowledge of biology to create monsters. Karnis Moore developed techniques for transferring consciousness between bodies. Sorzus Sin mastered alchemy that could turn living beings into weapons. These dark Jedi, as they came to be called, brought horrors to the galaxy that had never been seen before. They unleashed creatures called Leviathans, massive beasts corrupted by dark side energy and trained to hunt Force users. They created other abominations, twisted mockeries of natural life that served as their armies. Entire worlds fell to these monsters before the Republic even realized what was happening. The conflict spread across multiple star systems as the Dark Jedi established strongholds throughout the Outer Rim. They targeted Republic worlds that were isolated and vulnerable, using their creatures to terrorize populations into submission. They also actively recruited other Force users, promising power and freedom from the restrictions that the Jedi Council imposed. But the Republic had advantages the Dark Jedi hadn't counted on. The galaxy was far more developed and connected than it had been during earlier conflicts. Communication networks allowed rapid coordination between worlds. Hyperlanes that had been established over thousands of years enabled quick movement of forces. Most importantly, the vast majority of Jedi remained loyal to the Order and the principles they had sworn to uphold. Renowned Jedi Masters stepped forward to lead the fight against their fallen comrades. These weren't just powerful Force users, but brilliant strategists who understood how to coordinate large-scale military operations. They worked closely with Republic commanders to develop tactics specifically designed to counter the Dark Jedi's advantages. The key breakthrough came when loyal Jedi figured out how to neutralize the dark side creatures that formed the backbone of the enemy forces. They discovered that concentrated light side energy could disrupt the alchemy that held these monsters together. Teams of Jedi working in coordination could destroy entire squadrons of Leviathans, turning the Dark Jedi's greatest weapons against them. The tide had clearly turned. The Dark Jedi found themselves pushed back to their core strongholds, cut off from potential recruits and running low on resources. Their creatures were being systematically hunted down and destroyed. But more importantly, they had discovered the inherent weakness of dark side philosophy. When victory seemed assured, they started fighting each other for supremacy. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Korbos. This remote world had become the last major stronghold of the Dark Jedi, where they had gathered their remaining forces for a desperate final stand. The planet's surface was scarred by a century of warfare, its natural beauty twisted into something nightmarish by dark side corruption. Jedi forces surrounded Korbos and began a systematic assault on the Dark Jedi positions. This wasn't the quick strike that had characterized earlier battles. It was a grinding siege designed to eliminate every trace of dark side presence on the world. The Jedi had learned that half measures against this enemy only led to future problems. As their defenses crumbled, the surviving Dark Jedi leaders found themselves trapped with nowhere to retreat. Their creatures had been destroyed. Their followers had been killed or captured. They faced a choice between death and surrender, and they chose to surrender. The 100-year darkness was over, But it left the Republic and Jedi Order facing a difficult question. What do you do with fallen Jedi who have committed terrible crimes but might still be redeemed? Executing them seemed wrong, but allowing them to remain in Republic space would be dangerous. The solution they chose would have consequences that reached across the next 5,000 years of galactic history. Rather than execution, the Republic and Jedi Council decided on exile. Roughly a dozen surviving Dark Jedi and their most loyal followers were loaded onto ships and banished from Republic space forever. These weren't prison ships. They were given basic supplies and unarmed vessels, then sent into the unknown regions with orders never to return. The Republic believed this was a merciful solution that honored Jedi principles while protecting innocent beings from further corruption. What happened next was completely unexpected. The exiled Dark Jedi, led by Ajunta Pall, wandered through uncharted space for months before stumbling upon a world that would change galactic history. Korriban, located far from any known hyperlane, was home to a primitive species that shared an ominous name with the Sith teachings the exiles had studied. The Sith species were red-skinned humanoids who had developed their own relationship with the dark side of the Force. They used it in tribal rituals and sorcery, but they had never encountered beings with the kind of training and power that the exiled Dark Jedi possessed. When ships fell from the sky carrying Force users of incredible ability, the Sith people interpreted this as divine intervention. Ajunta Pall and his followers found themselves worshipped as gods by the native population. After years of running and hiding, after being branded as criminals and exiles, they were suddenly the most important beings on an entire world. The temptation to embrace this role was irresistible, especially for minds already corrupted by the dark side. The Dark Jedi exiles quickly took control as rulers over the Sith people. They took the title of Sith Lords, adopting the culture and symbolism of their new subjects while bringing Jedi knowledge and training to bear on their primitive Force traditions. Ajunta Pall declared himself the first Dark Lord of the Sith, establishing a hierarchy that would persist for millennia. Over the following decades, the exiles intermarried with the native Sith population, creating a hybrid culture that combined the worst aspects of both traditions. They built a new empire centered on Korriban, with additional colonies established on nearby worlds like Zeost. This wasn't just a government, but a civilization dedicated to the pursuit of dark side power. The Sith Lords delved deeper into forbidden knowledge than any Dark Jedi had dared during the 100-year darkness. They had unlimited test subjects in the native population, entire generations who viewed serving the Sith Lords as a religious duty. They experimented with alchemy, sorcery, and Force techniques that would have horrified even their former rebel colleagues. They also developed a political system that institutionalized the use of dark side power. The strongest Force users ruled absolutely, with lesser Sith Lords serving beneath them in a rigid hierarchy based on raw power. They adopted titles like Darth, marking their complete rejection of everything the Jedi represented. This Force-wielding magocracy would become the template for Sith government for the next 5,000 years. But perhaps most importantly, they preserved and expanded the knowledge they had gained during their time as Jedi researchers. They combined ancient Sith tribal wisdom with sophisticated Jedi training methods, creating new disciplines that were far more dangerous than either tradition alone. They developed techniques for extending life, for transferring consciousness between bodies, for creating life through the Force itself. The Sith Empire remained hidden from the Republic for nearly 2,000 years, cut off by the unknown regions and protected by their own secrecy. During this time, they grew in power and ambition, while the Republic remained completely unaware of their existence. The galaxy believed the Dark Jedi threat had been eliminated, never suspecting that exile had actually created something far worse. On Korriban, the Sith Lords built tombs and temples that would endure for millennia. They established academies where young Sith learned to channel hatred and ambition into power. They created a society where strength was the only virtue and weakness was punishable by death. Most ominously, they began planning their eventual return to the galaxy that had cast them out. Ancient Sith kings like Dathka Graush had ruled through civil war and assassination in the decades before. But after conquering Hakagram Graush, the new Sith Lords brought organization and long-term thinking to Korriban. They understood that their small empire could never defeat the Republic through direct confrontation. Instead, they would need to be patient, building their strength while waiting for the right moment to strike. The stage was now set for conflicts that would dwarf the 100-year darkness in scope and devastation. The Republic had unknowingly created its greatest enemy through an act of mercy. The Jedi had ensured their own future destruction by showing compassion to fallen colleagues. And the galaxy remained blissfully unaware that somewhere in the darkness, a new kind of evil was taking shape. The Sith Empire that grew from the ashes of the Dark Jedi Rebellion would become the Republic's most persistent and dangerous enemy. Unlike the impulsive researchers who had started the 100-year darkness, these Sith Lords understood the value of patience and planning. They would spend generations preparing for war, developing weapons and strategies specifically designed to destroy everything the Republic represented. When they finally emerged from the unknown regions, they would bring with them knowledge gained from 2,000 years of studying the dark side without restriction. They would command creatures and technologies that the galaxy had never seen. And they would be led by beings who had spent lifetimes nursing grudges against the Jedi and the Republic that had exiled them. The 100-year darkness had ended with what seemed like a Jedi victory. But in reality, it marked the beginning of a conflict that would span the next 5 millennia. The choice to exile rather than execute the Dark Jedi leaders proved that even mercy could have terrible consequences. And the galaxy would spend the next several thousand years learning just how terrible those consequences could be. 2 debt-ridden hyperspace explorers just made the worst wrong turn in galactic history. What happened next would bring the Republic face to face with an enemy they thought was extinct. For 1,500 years, the Sith Empire had been growing in the unknown regions, completely hidden from Republic knowledge. By 5000 BBY, they controlled multiple star systems with Zeost as their political capital and Korriban serving as their sacred burial world. The Sith had developed into a sophisticated civilization ruled by Dark Lords who commanded powers the galaxy had forgotten existed. At the center of this empire sat Marka Ragnos, a Dark Lord who had maintained power for over a century through a combination of cunning and raw strength. Ragnos understood the delicate balance required to keep ambitious Sith Lords from destroying each other. He allowed competition and conflict, but always made sure it served the Empire rather than tearing it apart. When Ragnos died in 5000 BBY, that careful balance shattered immediately. Two powerful Sith Lords stepped forward to claim his throne, each representing a different vision for the Empire's future. Naga Sadow was an ambitious sorcerer who believed the Sith should expand aggressively, conquering new worlds and spreading their influence. Ludo Kresh took a more conservative approach, arguing that the Empire should focus on consolidating its existing power before risking exposure to outside threats. The funeral of Marka Ragnos in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban became the stage for this power struggle. As Sith tradition demanded, Sadow and Kresh faced each other in combat to determine who would rule. But this wasn't just a duel between rivals. The spirit of Marka Ragnos himself appeared during the fight, warning both contenders that greater challenges lay ahead for the Sith people. Despite this ominous prophecy, Sadow emerged victorious and was anointed as the new Dark Lord of the Sith. But victory in combat didn't guarantee loyalty from other Sith Lords. Kresh accepted the outcome publicly while secretly planning to undermine his rival's rule. The stage was set for internal conflict that would soon explode into something much larger. Fate intervened in the form of two Republic citizens who had no idea they were about to trigger a galactic war. Gav and Jory Darrigan were hyperspace explorers from Koros Major in the Empress Teta system. They weren't soldiers or spies, just merchants trying to make their fortune by discovering new trade routes. Unfortunately, they were also heavily in debt and running from creditors who wanted immediate payment. In desperation, the Darrigan siblings made a blind hyperspace jump, hoping to find an unexplored system where they could establish profitable trade relationships. Instead, their ship emerged in Sith space and crashed on Korriban right in the middle of Marka Ragnos's funeral ceremonies. They had stumbled into a civilization that had been hidden from the Republic for over a millennium. The Sith Lords immediately viewed these outsiders as potential threats. Here were beings who knew the location of Sith space and could report back to whatever government had sent them. The logical response was to execute them immediately and hope no one else would follow their trail. But Naga Sadow saw something different in their arrival. He saw opportunity. Sadow realized that these Republic explorers could provide him with exactly what he needed to unite the fractious Sith Lords under his leadership. He secretly arranged for the Darrigans to escape their captivity, then staged fake attacks that made it appear as though Republic forces had mounted a rescue mission. To the other Sith Lords, this looked like evidence that the Republic not only knew about their empire, but was actively moving against it. The deception worked perfectly. Faced with what seemed like an external threat, the Sith Lords rallied behind Sadow's leadership. Even Ludo Kresh had to support preparations for war, though he remained suspicious of how conveniently these events had unfolded. Sadow had successfully manufactured the crisis he needed to consolidate power and pursue his expansionist dreams. Using navigation data secretly copied from Jory Darrigan's ship, Sadow began planning an invasion of Republic space. The hyperspace coordinates they had used to reach Sith territory could be reversed to create what became known as the Daragon Trail, a direct route from the Sith Empire to the heart of Republic civilization. For the first time in 15 centuries, the Sith had a way to strike at their ancient enemies. In late 5000 BBY, Naga Sadow launched the largest military operation in Sith history. Hundreds of warships emerged from hyperspace simultaneously across multiple Republic systems, catching the government completely off guard. The Republic had no idea the Sith even existed, let alone that they commanded technology and dark side powers that could challenge galactic civilization itself. The attack on Coruscant itself demonstrated the scope of Sado's ambitions. Sith warships appeared in orbit around the Republic capital, raining destruction on government facilities and civilian targets. But Sado had learned from the failures of earlier Sith campaigns. Rather than relying purely on military force, he employed dark side illusions to make his fleet appear much larger than it actually was. These force-powered deceptions created panic throughout the Republic capital as defenders struggled to count enemy ships that seemed to multiply before their eyes. Communication systems were jammed by Sith sorcery. Planetary defenses targeted phantom vessels, while real Sith ships struck from unexpected angles. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the physical damage. Simultaneously, Sith forces followed the Darragon Trail to attack other strategic targets. The Koros system, which would later be renamed the Empress Teta system in honor of its defender, came under heavy assault. The planet Kirik also faced Sith invasion forces that brought dark side creatures and weapons the Republic had never encountered before. But the Republic was far from defenseless. Leaders like Empress Teta herself took direct command of planetary defenses, inspiring their people to resist the mysterious invaders. More importantly, the Jedi Order rallied to meet this new threat with everything they had learned over thousands of years of protecting galactic peace. Jedi Master Odan became the key figure in turning the tide of battle. Through careful study of Sith tactics and deep meditation on the Force, he discovered the secret behind Sado's apparent numerical superiority. The multiple fleets that Republic defenders were fighting were largely illusions, projections created by Sado's battle meditation from his command ship. Once Odan exposed this deception, the true scope of the Sith invasion became clear. They were dangerous and powerful, but they weren't the overwhelming force they had appeared to be. Republic commanders could now focus their attacks on real targets instead of chasing phantoms. The defense of Coruscant succeeded, and Sith forces throughout Republic space found themselves facing increasingly effective resistance. As his invasion faltered, Sado faced a crisis that threatened more than just his military campaign. Reports reached him that Ludo Kresh had not only survived their earlier conflicts, but was actively moving against him back in Sith space. While Sado was fighting the Republic, his rival had been gathering supporters and preparing a coup that would remove him from power. Sado was forced to make a terrible choice. He could continue his campaign against the Republic and risk losing everything to Kresh's rebellion, or he could abandon his invasion to deal with the threat to his own rule. Ultimately, his need to maintain power outweighed his ambitions for conquest. The Dark Lord began withdrawing his forces from Republic space. But the Republic wasn't content to simply drive off the invaders. They had discovered the existence of a hostile empire that posed an ongoing threat to galactic peace. Using tracking technology attached to Jory Darragon's ship, Republic forces followed the retreating Sith fleet back to their home territory, turning what had been a defensive war into an offensive campaign. The final confrontation between Sado and Kresh took place in orbit around Korriban itself, with Republic warships closing in on both Sith factions. In a desperate battle that epitomized the self-destructive nature of Sith philosophy, Sado managed to destroy Kresh's flagship, apparently killing his rival once and for all. But this Pyrrhic victory left him with minimal forces just as the Republic Navy arrived in overwhelming numbers. Faced with certain defeat, Sado made one last desperate gambit. He retreated to the Denarii system, where the binary stars of Primus Golud offered him a chance to use an ancient Sith superweapon. Through dark side ritual and forbidden technology, Sado caused one of the stars to go supernova, creating a massive explosion that destroyed much of the pursuing Republic fleet. This victory bought Sado the time he needed to escape, but it also demonstrated the kind of destructive power the Sith were willing to use when cornered. The artificial supernova served as a warning of what the galaxy faced if these dark side users were ever allowed to reach their full potential. It also provided cover for Sado's final retreat to Yavin 4, a remote jungle moon where he went into hiding with his most loyal Massassi warriors. The Republic under Supreme Chancellor Pultimo refused to let the Sith threat survive to menace the galaxy again. Operation Yellow Vapor was launched as a systematic campaign to eliminate Sith presence throughout the Stygian caldera. Republic and Jedi forces moved from world to world, liberating conquered populations and destroying Sith strongholds. The campaign was ruthlessly effective. Zeost fell to Republic assault, its government facilities destroyed, and its Sith lords killed or captured. Korriban itself was invaded, its ancient tombs and temples left in ruins. The Sith Empire that had taken 15 centuries to build was dismantled in a matter of months. Most of the remaining Sith lords died fighting rather than surrender to their ancient enemies. A few managed to escape into deep space, but they were scattered and powerless, reduced to hiding in remote systems where they could no longer threaten galactic peace. One Sith starship called the Omen was flung far across the galaxy, eventually crashing on the world of Kesh, where its crew would establish a hidden colony that survived in complete isolation. The Republic celebrated what appeared to be a total victory over the Sith threat. The mysterious empire had been destroyed, its leaders killed or scattered, its worlds occupied by Republic forces. For the first time since the Great Hyperspace War began, the galaxy seemed safe from dark side corruption on a massive scale. But the Republic's intelligence was incomplete. One Sith Lord had avoided the war entirely, choosing to pursue a different path to power. Vishiet, who ruled the world of Nathema, had watched the conflict from afar while developing plans that made Nagasado's ambitions seem small by comparison. After Sado's defeat, Vishiet sent out a call to surviving Sith throughout the galaxy. He promised them sanctuary on Nathema and a chance to rebuild their shattered order. When the survivors gathered on his world in 4999 BBY, they thought they were attending a council of war to plan their comeback. Instead, they became victims of the most horrific ritual in Sith history. Vishiet had spent years preparing a ceremony that would grant him power beyond anything the Sith had ever achieved. Using techniques drawn from the deepest wells of dark side knowledge, he performed the ritual of Nathema, sacrificing every living thing on the planet to fuel his own transformation. The other Sith Lords, all plant and animal life, even microscopic organisms, were consumed in an act of destruction that left Nathema completely lifeless. The ritual succeeded beyond Vishiet's wildest dreams. He gained immortality and power that made him effectively unstoppable by conventional means. But the cost was staggering. An entire world was rendered permanently dead, its very connection to the Force severed forever. And Vishiet himself was transformed into something that was barely recognizable as a living being. Declaring himself the new Sith Emperor, Vashid gathered the few Sith loyalists who had not attended his deadly ritual and led them into the unknown regions. By 4980 BBY, they had established a new hidden empire on Dromund Kaas, a world that had been settled by ancient Sith explorers but forgotten by the galaxy at large. There, in absolute secrecy, Vashid began building something far more dangerous than the empire Naga Sadow had commanded. This new Sith Empire would be organized around his immortal rule, designed to serve his ultimately goal of consuming all life in the galaxy. Unlike previous Sith leaders who had been limited by normal lifespans, Vashid could plan operations that would unfold over millennia. The Great Hyperspace War had ended with what seemed like a Republic victory, but it actually marked the beginning of an even greater threat. The Sith had learned from their defeat and evolved into something more patient and more deadly. While the galaxy believed the dark side threat had been eliminated, it was actually growing stronger in the darkness beyond known space. This pattern would repeat throughout the old Republic timeline. Moments of apparent victory would mask deeper defeats. Acts of mercy would create future enemies, and the fundamental conflict between light and dark would continue to shape galactic civilization in ways that no one could predict. The war that began with two lost explorers making a wrong turn had shown the galaxy that ancient enemies could return from the shadows at any moment. It had demonstrated the destructive power of the dark side when wielded by organized civilizations. And it had proven that even total military victory might not be enough to eliminate threats that could hide in the unknown regions of space. The stage was now set for the next phase of the old Republic story, where the consequences of the Great Hyperspace War would continue to unfold across the millennia. The Republic had won the battle, but the war between light and dark was far from over. One angry Jedi student was about to resurrect the galaxy's deadliest enemy. 400 years after the Great Hyperspace War ended, someone was foolish enough to go looking for Sith secrets. Freeden Nad wasn't your typical Jedi Padawan. Training on Ossus under Master Matta Tremaine, Nad showed extraordinary potential in the Force, the kind of raw power that should have guaranteed him knighthood. But power without patience is dangerous, and Nad had no interest in waiting for the Jedi Council to decide he was ready. When the Council denied his promotion to Jedi Knight, Nad's frustration boiled over into something darker. He began studying forbidden texts in the Ossus archives, seeking knowledge the Jedi had deliberately hidden away. Ancient Sith holocrons, recovered artifacts from the Hyperspace War, accounts of dark side techniques that previous generations had deemed too dangerous to preserve. Nad absorbed it all with the hunger of someone who believed rules were meant for lesser beings. His master, Matta Tremaine, tried to guide him back to the proper path. She saw the warning signs, the way Nad's ambition was consuming his better judgment. But when she confronted him about his forbidden research, Nad made a choice that would echo across the next 1,000 years. He killed his own master in cold blood, using the dark side techniques he had been secretly studying. With Tremaine dead and his crimes exposed, Nad fled Ossus aboard a stolen ship. But he wasn't running away from his actions. He was running towards something that called to him through the Force, a beacon of dark energy that pulled him toward the Outer Rim. Nad had read about Naga Sadow's final retreat after the Great Hyperspace War, and he suspected he knew where to find the ancient Dark Lord's legacy. Yavin 4 was still the same jungle moon where Sadow had hidden centuries earlier, But now it held something Nad desperately wanted. Deep within a vine-covered temple, the spirit of Naga Sadow still lingered, sustained by dark side energy and an unquenchable thirst for revenge against the Jedi who had destroyed his empire. When Nad found Sadow's ghost in that ancient temple, both beings saw opportunity in each other. Sadow needed a living vessel to continue his work and perhaps find a way back to physical existence. Nad wanted the power and knowledge that came from being trained by a true Sith Lord, rather than learning from dusty holocrons and incomplete texts. The training that followed was unlike anything in Jedi tradition. Sadow taught Nad Sith alchemy, the art of creating life and twisting it to serve dark purposes. He showed him sorcery that could extend life far beyond normal spans and techniques for manipulating matter itself through the Force. Most importantly, Sadow shared the political and military wisdom he had gained from ruling an empire and commanding armies. Nad proved to be an exceptional student, absorbing centuries of Sith knowledge in just a few years. But he also inherited the fundamental Sith philosophy that strength came through betrayal and the weak existed only to serve the strong. When Nad felt he had learned everything Sadow could teach him, he turned that philosophy against his ghostly master. Using the very techniques Sadow had taught him, Nad attacked the ancient spirit and completely destroyed him. This wasn't just murder, but spiritual annihilation, ensuring that Naga Sadow could never return in any form. With Sadow gone, Nad claimed all the Sith artifacts and knowledge hidden on Yavin 4 for himself. Armed with genuine Sith power and centuries of accumulated dark side wisdom, Nad set out to carve his own kingdom from the galaxy. He could have targeted any number of worlds, but he chose Onderon, a remote planet that offered everything he needed. It was far from Republic oversight, populated by people who had never encountered Force users, and divided by internal conflicts that a clever manipulator could exploit. Onderon was essentially a medieval world, where most of the population lived in a single walled city called Iziz. Beyond the city walls lay dangerous wilderness filled with predatory beasts that made expansion impossible for the city dwellers. The planet's isolation and primitive technology meant that Nad's Force powers would seem godlike to the local population. Around this time, in our Old Republic timeline, Nad launched his conquest of Onderon. It wasn't really a war so much as a demonstration of overwhelming supernatural power. The planet's existing rulers had no defense against Sith sorcery, and within weeks Nad had installed himself as both King of Onderon and the first new Dark Lord of the Sith since the Hyperspace War. Unlike previous Sith Lords who had inherited existing empires, Nad built his kingdom from the ground up according to his own vision. He used Sith techniques to extend his lifespan, ensuring that he could rule for over a century and personally shape Onderonian society. Under his reign, the city of Iziz became a place where strength and ruthlessness were the only virtues that mattered. Nad implemented a brutal system of justice that would have long-term consequences for Onderon. Anyone who opposed his rule, committed crimes, or simply proved inconvenient was banished from Iziz into the dangerous wilderness beyond the city walls. Most of these exiles died quickly, torn apart by the predatory beasts that dominated Onderon's jungles. But some survived by learning to fight back. The exiles who managed to survive in the wilderness discovered something remarkable. The flying beasts that had been Onderon's greatest threat could actually be tamed and ridden. Creatures like Drexels, Massive predators with leathery wings and razor-sharp claws became mounts and companions for humans desperate enough to try anything. Over generations, these survivors and their descendants developed into a completely different culture from the city dwellers of Aziz. They called themselves Beast Riders, and they had good reason to hate everything King Nad represented. Their ancestors had been cast out to die simply because they had challenged his authority or failed to meet his standards of loyalty. The Beast Riders developed their own settlements in the wilderness, hidden communities where they bred and trained the creatures that had once terrorized them. They passed down stories of injustice and oppression, maintaining their resentment across multiple generations. Most importantly, they developed military tactics specifically designed to assault the walled city that had rejected them. What followed was centuries of guerrilla warfare known as the Beast Wars. The Beast Riders would swoop down from the sky on their flying mounts, attacking Aziz's defenses and striking at the city dwellers who lived in relative comfort behind their walls. These weren't random raids, but calculated assaults meant to gradually weaken the city and eventually reclaim it for the exiled. Meanwhile, inside Aziz, Freeden Nad eventually died around the middle of the 4th millennium, but death didn't end his influence over Onderon. Using Sith techniques he had learned from Naga Sadow, Nad ensured his bloodline would continue to rule the planet. His body was entombed beneath the royal palace in a sarcophagus specially designed to preserve his dark side energy. The tomb became more than just a burial site. It was a nexus of dark power that allowed Nad's spirit to continue mentoring his descendants. Each new ruler of Onderon drew strength from their ancestors' ghostly presence, learning Sith techniques and maintaining the oppressive system Nad had established. Queen Amanoa and later King Omen both channeled power from Nad's tomb, perpetuating his influence long after his physical death. This spiritual corruption had an effect that Nad probably never intended. The Beast Riders, living in the wilderness around Aziz, could sense the dark side emanating from the city. Even without formal Force training, they understood that something fundamentally evil had taken root in their ancestral home. This mystical awareness added religious fervor to their political grievances, making the Beast Wars about more than just territorial disputes. While Onderon burned with centuries of civil conflict, the rest of the galaxy experienced its own problems with fallen Jedi. At this time, another group of dark Jedi broke away from the Order on Coruscant, creating what became known as the Third Great Schism. Like their predecessors, these rebels believed they could use dark side power for righteous purposes. These new dark Jedi fled to the Voltar system, where they discovered an ancient artifact called the Cosmic Turbine. They believed they could weaponize this relic to destroy their enemies and establish themselves as the galaxy's new rulers. Instead, their experiments caused a catastrophic failure that annihilated the entire Voltar system, killing the Dark Jedi and providing another cautionary tale about the dangers of dark side corruption. Back on Onderon, the Beast Wars continued to rage without resolution. By around 4000 BBY, the conflict had persisted for so long that it finally attracted attention from the wider galaxy. The Jedi Council received reports about this mysterious civil war on a distant Outer Rim world and decided to investigate. Jedi Master Arca Jeth was the guardian responsible for the Onderon sector, though he had never actually visited the planet before. When he decided to intervene in the Beast Wars, he chose to send 3 newly minted Jedi Knights, rather than handling the situation personally. This decision would have massive consequences for the future of the Old Republic. The three knights Arca sent to Onderon were brothers Ulic and Kay Keldroma, along with their friend Tot Donita, a Twi'lek who had trained alongside them. These young Jedi had distinguished themselves during their training, but they had no experience dealing with dark side corruption or political conflicts as complex as the Beast Wars. When the Jedi arrived in Iziz, they were received as honored guests by Queen Aminoa, who presented herself as a legitimate ruler seeking help with rebel insurgents. The Queen didn't mention that she drew power from a Sith tomb or that the Beast Riders had legitimate grievances against her family's rule. From her perspective, the Jedi were just useful allies who could help her crush the rebellion once and for all. The situation became complicated when Beast Riders led by Oron Kira kidnapped Princess Gallia, Queen Aminoa's daughter. The Jedi initially viewed this as a terrorist act, but they soon discovered that Gallia had actually arranged her own kidnapping. She was in love with Oron and wanted to marry him as a way of uniting the two factions and ending the centuries of warfare. This revelation forced the Jedi to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the conflict. If the princess herself believed the Beast Riders had legitimate grievances, perhaps the situation was more complex than Queen Aminoa had suggested. When the Jedi investigated further, they made a disturbing discovery about the true nature of Onderon's rulers. Queen Aminoa wasn't just a political leader, but an active practitioner of the dark side, drawing power directly from Freeden Nad's tomb beneath the palace. She had been using Sith sorcery to maintain her authority and had no intention of making peace with the Beast Riders. When the Jedi confronted her about this corruption, Aminoa revealed her true nature and unleashed dark side energies against them. The conflict escalated rapidly as the Beast Riders, supported by the Jedi, launched a full-scale assault on Iziz. Princess Gallia and Oron Kira led the attack, hoping to overthrow the dark side monarchy and establish a government that could represent both city dwellers and wilderness survivors. But Aminoa had resources the attackers hadn't fully appreciated. Drawing power from Nad's tomb, the Queen proved to be a formidable opponent who could match the Jedi in combat. Her dark side abilities had been developed over decades of study under her ancestors' ghostly tutelage. She commanded Sith sorcery that could strike down multiple opponents and defenses that seemed impenetrable to conventional attacks. The tide turned when Master Arca Jeth finally arrived on Onderon to support his students. Arca was one of the most powerful Jedi of his generation, with abilities that few could match. He used battle meditation to strengthen the Beast Rider assault while simultaneously projecting light side energy that began to disrupt the dark side nexus centered on Nad's tomb. Under Arca's influence, the spiritual corruption that had sustained Queen Aminoa for so long began to weaken. Freedon Nad's ghost found itself unable to maintain its connection to the physical world when confronted by such concentrated light side power. As Nad's spirit was forced to withdraw, Aminoa lost access to the Sith abilities that had made her so dangerous. Without dark side enhancement, Queen Aminoa collapsed and died just as Iziz fell to the combined forces of Jedi and Beast Riders. The Beast Wars ended with the marriage of Princess Gallia and Oron Kira, symbolically uniting the two factions under new leadership that represented both communities. Master Arca arranged for Freeden Nad's remains to be removed from the palace and relocated to Duxon, Onderon's beast-infested moon. The idea was to isolate the dark side nexus away from populated areas where it could corrupt future generations. Queen Aminoa's body was also moved to prevent her from becoming another spiritual anchor for dark side energy. The Jedi believed they had solved the Onderon crisis and eliminated the threat posed by Freedon Nad's legacy. They had ended a war that had lasted for centuries and helped establish a government that could represent all of Onderon's people. But their understanding of Sith corruption was incomplete, and they had made a critical error in their planning. Despite being moved to Duxin, Freedon Nad's spirit endured and found new ways to continue his influence over Onderon. King Omen, Queen Aminoa's elderly husband, who had been overlooked during the crisis, was already steeped in Sith teachings. Nad's ghost, furious at being expelled from Iziz, began tutoring Omen more directly than he had ever trained Aminoa. While Onderon enjoyed a brief period of peace under its new rulers, a new crisis was quietly brewing. Nad's spectral presence on Duxin gave him access to the moon's savage wildlife, and his corruption of King Omen provided him with an agent still positioned within Onderon's government. The dark side had been pushed back but not eliminated, setting the stage for future conflicts that would eventually draw in some of the most important figures in Old Republic history. The Onderon crisis demonstrated several important patterns that would repeat throughout the Old Republic timeline. Dark side corruption could persist for centuries if not properly addressed. Political conflicts often masked deeper spiritual problems that required Force users to resolve. And most dangerously, the Sith tradition could survive and spread even when its practitioners appeared to be defeated. Freedon Nad's legacy would continue to influence galactic events for decades to come, proving that individual Sith Lords could be as dangerous as entire empires when they combined patience with cunning. The stage was being set for conflicts that would eventually threaten the Republic itself and test whether the Jedi had learned enough from their encounters with the dark side to prevent its resurgence. The Great Sith War. A funeral became a kidnapping became a war, and that war nearly destroyed the Republic itself. But before we dive into the chaos that erupted on Onderon, we need to understand one of the most important Jedi of this era. Master Thon had accomplished something that seemed impossible. On the planet Ambria, this ancient and wise Jedi had contained an entire world's worth of dark side corruption to a single location, proving that even the most poisoned places could be cleansed through patience and mastery of the Force. Ambria had been a nightmare world where dark side energies ran wild, corrupting everything they touched. Most Jedi would have avoided such a place entirely, but Thon saw it as an opportunity to study how darkness could be contained and eventually neutralized. Through decades of meditation and careful application of light side techniques, he had managed to trap all the planet's dark side influence in one concentrated area, leaving the rest of Ambria safe for normal life. This achievement made Thon one of the galaxy's foremost experts on combating Sith corruption, knowledge that would prove crucial in the conflicts to come. But perhaps his greatest contribution to galactic history came through training a student who would reshape the Jedi Order itself. Nomi Sunrider arrived on Ambria as a widow seeking answers. Her husband Andur had been killed while transporting Jedi artifacts, leaving her alone with their young daughter Vima and a mysterious Adagan crystal that seemed to call to her through the Force. She had no formal training as a Jedi, But Master Thrawn immediately recognized her extraordinary potential. Under Thrawn's guidance, Nomi began developing abilities that would make her legendary. She showed a natural talent for battle meditation, a rare gift that allowed her to influence the morale and effectiveness of entire military forces through the Force. During a skirmish with Boga, the Hutt's criminal forces on Ambria, Nomi first demonstrated this power while wielding Thrawn's own lightsaber in combat. The attack on Ambria was meant to capture Master Thrawn for the Hutt crime lord, but it became the moment when Nomi truly embraced her destiny as a Jedi. Her battle meditation turned the tide against overwhelming odds, while her lightsaber skills proved she could hold her own against professional warriors despite her lack of formal training. Thrawn declared her ready to become a Jedi Knight after this trial by fire, recognizing that she possessed both the power and the wisdom necessary to serve the galaxy. This decision would have consequences that reached far beyond a single planet, as Nomi would eventually become one of the most important figures in Jedi history. Meanwhile, King Omen had been hiding in the shadows of Onderon politics for decades, his frail body kept alive by dark side energy and mechanical life support systems. When Queen Aminoa died and the Jedi moved Freda Nad's tomb to Duxon, the Nadist loyalists throughout Aziz saw their world collapsing. But Omen saw opportunity. Just as the Republic thought the Onderon crisis was over, the real nightmare began. The Freda Nad uprising erupted during Queen Aminoa's funeral ceremony. Nadist cultists, empowered by their king's sorcery, struck without warning. They disrupted the solemn proceedings and launched a coordinated assault on the Jedi who had remained on Onderon to ensure a peaceful transition. Their primary target was Master Arca Jeth, the respected Jedi leader whose light side powers had been instrumental in defeating Aminoa. The Nadists succeeded in their most audacious goal. They captured Arca Jeth and dragged him beneath the royal palace, where King Omen waited in the depths. But the cultists didn't stop there. They also retrieved the coffins containing Freda Nad and Queen Aminoa, determined to protect these dark side relics from further Jedi interference. Street fighting erupted throughout Aziz as Ulic and Kay Keldroma rallied to rescue their master. Republic reinforcements arrived, bringing additional Jedi Knights, including Nomi Sunrider, now a fully trained knight whose husband had died in earlier conflicts, and Tal, a skilled warrior who would become legendary in her own right. The battle raged through the city as Nadist forces used Sith sorcery against conventional weapons and lightsabers. Deep beneath the palace, Arca Jeth faced King Omen in single combat. The ancient king drew power directly from Freda Nad's spiritual presence, wielding dark energies that made him far more dangerous than his decrepit appearance suggested. But the Jedi had learned much about combating Sith corruption during their time on Onderon, and Arca's mastery of the light side proved superior to Omen's borrowed power. When the battle reached its climax, something unexpected happened. Freda Nad's spirit manifested physically, confronting the Jedi directly for the first time since his death centuries earlier. The ghostly Sith Lord realized that Onderon was truly lost to his influence. Rather than waste energy on a doomed cause, Nad abandoned King Omen entirely, allowing the old king to die as his dark side life support failed. But Nad's spirit didn't dissipate. Instead, his dark essence escaped into the wider galaxy, seeking new apprentices who could continue his work. This spiritual departure marked the end of direct Sith influence on Onderon, but it also meant that Nad's corruption would soon spread to other worlds. Among those who witnessed these dramatic events were two young aristocrats from the Empress Teta system. Satal and Alima Keto had come to Onderon seeking Sith knowledge for their own purposes. During the chaos of the uprising, they managed to steal ancient Sith texts and even received brief training from King Omin before his death. When the Republic emerged victorious, the Keto cousins fled back to their home system, carrying Nad's teachings with them. The Ketos wasted no time in putting their stolen knowledge to use. Around this time, they founded a secret organization called the Krath, blending Sith magic with the considerable resources of their aristocratic family. Their first target was their own government. In a shocking display of ruthless ambition, Satal and Alima assassinated their political rivals, including their own parents, who had been ruling the Empress Teta system. With their family's leadership eliminated, the Keto cousins seized control of all 7 worlds in the Empress Teta system and declared the beginning of the Krath Holy Crusade. This wasn't just a political coup, but the establishment of a dark side theocracy that imposed Sith philosophy on millions of citizens. The Krath combined ancient Sith sorcery with modern military technology, creating a threat unlike anything the Republic had faced since the Great Hyperspace War. Republic garrisons throughout the Tetan system came under immediate attack as Krath forces moved to consolidate their control. At the Battle of Koros Major, Alima Keto demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of Sith illusions and mind manipulation against conventional military forces. Republic commanders found themselves unable to distinguish real threats from phantoms, leading to friendly fire incidents and tactical confusion that decimated their ranks. News of the Krath uprising reached the wider Republic just as Jedi Knight Ulic Qel-Droma was still processing the trauma of his master's kidnapping and the violence on Onderon. Ulic threw himself into the fight against this new Sith-inspired threat, leading a relief fleet to aid whatever legitimate Tetan forces remained loyal to the Republic. During the space battle above Empress Teta, Alima Keto personally targeted Ulic's flagship, the Reliance. Using Sith alchemy techniques she had learned from the stolen texts, Alima cast a dark side spell that infected Ulic with a subtle poison. This wasn't a physical toxin, but a spiritual corruption that planted seeds of curiosity about the dark side in his mind. The Republic fleet was forced to retreat after suffering heavy casualties, but the real damage had been done to Ulic personally. The poison Alima had used was designed to gradually erode his moral certainties and make him more receptive to dark side philosophy. Though Ulic didn't realize it yet, his fall had already begun. Alarmed by both the Onderon crisis and the Krath uprising, the Jedi Council convened a grand assembly on the world of Deneba. Hundreds of Jedi Masters and Knights gathered to discuss how the Order should respond to these escalating threats. The gathering included some of the most respected figures in the galaxy, including Master Thon, whose success in containing dark side corruption on Ambria was specifically referenced by Master Arkajeth as an example of what could be accomplished with patience and wisdom. Thon's expertise made him one of the most important voices at the conclave. His decades of experience with dark side energies gave him insights that other Jedi lacked, and his successful training of Nomi Sunrider demonstrated that the Order could adapt to new challenges by developing unconventional talents like battle meditation. The conclave on Deneba was intended to be a peaceful planning session, but the Krath had other ideas. They had infiltrated the gathering by placing sleeper droids among the service staff and security personnel. When these machines suddenly activated and transformed into war droids, the Jedi found themselves under attack in what should have been a safe haven. The ensuing battle tested every Jedi present as they fought to protect each other and the valuable knowledge stored at the Deneba facility. Master Thrawn fought alongside his former apprentice Nomi Sunrider and the other assembled Jedi as they struggled to repel the surprise assault. Though the Jedi ultimately defeated the attack, they suffered a devastating loss. Master Arca Jeth, who had survived the Onderon crisis and the confrontation with King Omen, was killed by a Krath war droid during the fighting. Arca's death shattered Ulic Qel-Droma, who had already been psychologically damaged by Alima's poison and the violence he had witnessed. The loss of his beloved master, combined with his growing obsession with defeating the Krath, led Ulic to propose a desperate plan. He would infiltrate the Krath by pretending to defect, learning their secrets from within before destroying them. The Jedi Council and Ulic's friends, including Nomi Sunrider and his brother Kay, argued against this dangerous strategy. Master Thrawn was among those who warned that anyone who went undercover among dark side users risked corruption themselves. They understood from experience how subtle and insidious Sith influence could be. But Ulic was determined to honor his master's memory and prove that he could succeed where conventional approaches had failed. Around the same time, another Jedi was embarking on his own dangerous quest for forbidden knowledge. Exar Kun was a brilliant archaeologist who had trained under Master Vodo Siosk Bas on Dantooine. Kun had become obsessed with Sith artifacts and ancient dark side techniques, believing that understanding these powers would make him a more effective protector of the innocent. Despite explicit orders from the Jedi Council to abandon his research, Kun continued seeking out Sith knowledge throughout the galaxy. His journey took him to Duxin, where he discovered Frida Nad's relocated tomb. The ancient Sith spirit, now free from his obligations on Onderon, eagerly began training this new potential apprentice in the ways of the dark side. Under Nad's guidance, Kun traveled to Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld, where he survived deadly trials in the tombs of long-dead Dark Lords. Each test pushed him further toward the dark side, while convincing him that he was gaining the power necessary to protect the galaxy. Nad then led Kun to Yavin 4, where Naga Sadow's ancient temples contained devices and knowledge that promised even greater abilities. On Yavin 4, Kun underwent a transformation that completed his fall to the dark side. Using Naga Sadow's alchemical devices, he gained immense power at the cost of his moral foundation. But Kun's corruption manifested differently than most fallen Jedi. Rather than becoming a servant of existing Sith teachings, he declared his independence by destroying Frida Nad's spirit entirely. With Nad's ghostly presence eliminated, Kun proclaimed himself a Dark Lord of the Sith, with no master to serve. He crafted a double-bladed lightsaber, a weapon that would become his signature, and began rallying the primitive Massassi inhabitants of Yavin 4 to his cause. These descendants of ancient Sith servants became Kun's first army as he prepared to challenge the galaxy. Meanwhile, Ulic Qel-Droma had traveled to Sinagar, the capital of the Empress Teta system, where he attempted to infiltrate the Krath leadership. His plan initially seemed to work, as Satal Keto welcomed him as a potential ally and began introducing him to Krath philosophy and methods. But the dark side corruption Alima had planted in Ulix's mind made him far more susceptible to temptation than he realized. Satel Keto accelerated Ulix's corruption by dosing him with additional Sith poisons that heightened his anger and reduced his emotional control. To prove his loyalty to the Krath cause, Ulix was forced to commit increasingly brutal acts. When Satal killed Ulix's lover in a test of allegiance, Ulix's rage exploded and he murdered Satal in return. This act of violence completed Ulix's transformation. Rather than feeling horror at what he had done, he felt liberated by the power that dark emotions provided. Alima Keto welcomed him as her new partner in ruling the Krath, and Ulix found himself genuinely attracted to the freedom from moral constraints that Sith philosophy offered. When Nomi Sunrider led a Jedi rescue mission to extract Ulix from Sinagar, she discovered that her friend was no longer the man she had known. Ulix not only refused to leave, but actively opposed the Jedi who had come to save him. The corruption that had begun as a tactical deception had become complete spiritual transformation. The two fallen Jedi finally encountered each other when Exar Kun arrived on Empress Teta, just as the Jedi were mounting a second rescue attempt for Ulix. Kun viewed Ulix as a rival who was stealing the title of Dark Lord that Kun believed belonged to him alone. Their meeting at the Iron Citadel on Sinagar began as a confrontation between two Sith aspirants testing each other's strength. The duel between Kun and Ulix might have ended with one killing the other, but ancient forces intervened. The spirit of Marka Ragnos, the Sith Lord who had died nearly 1,500 years earlier, manifested before both combatants. Ragnos recognized that both fallen Jedi possessed the power and ruthlessness necessary to restore Sith dominance over the galaxy. Rather than allowing them to destroy each other, Ragnos anointed Exar Kun as the new Dark Lord of the Sith and Ulix Keldroma as his apprentice. This spiritual blessing united them into what they called the Brotherhood of the Sith, a partnership that combined Kun's knowledge of ancient Sith techniques with Ulix's strategic brilliance and military connections. With their alliance formalized, the two Dark Lords began planning a campaign that would dwarf previous Sith threats. They had the Krath military forces under their command, the Masasi warriors of Yavin 4, and knowledge of Sith superweapons that had been lost for millennia. But they also understood that they needed additional allies to challenge the Republic successfully. Ulix's first major recruitment success came when he traveled to Quar and challenged Mandalore, the Indomitable, to single combat. The Mandalorian leader had been rebuilding his people's military strength since their defeat during the Great Hyperspace War era. When Ulix defeated Mandalore in a fair fight, the honor-bound Mandalorian Crusaders agreed to join the Sith War effort. This alliance brought tens of thousands of skilled warriors to the Brotherhood's cause, along with advanced military technology and battle-tested tactical knowledge. The addition of Mandalorian forces meant that the Sith could now field armies capable of conquering entire star systems rather than just isolated worlds. Exar Kun contributed his own strategic advantages by seeking out ancient Sith superweapons that previous Dark Lords had hidden throughout the galaxy. His most significant discovery was the Dark Reaper, a massive war machine from the earliest days of the Sith Empire. When activated, this device could drain life energy from entire populations, using their deaths to power devastating weapons. Later that year, the Brotherhood of the Sith had assembled forces and resources that made them the most dangerous threat the Republic had faced in over 1,000 years. Their strategy went far beyond conventional military assault. They orchestrated simultaneous uprisings on multiple worlds, using fallen Jedi who had been recruited to their cause to lead insurrections against local governments. The Great Sith War erupted across dozens of star systems as the Brotherhood's carefully coordinated plan unfolded. Republic forces found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against enemies who combined conventional military tactics with dark side powers. Sith assassins targeted Jedi throughout the galaxy, using ancient beasts and alchemical weapons to kill protectors who had never encountered such threats. Among the targets was Master Thon himself. Exar Kun had sent his corrupted former students to murder their old masters across the galaxy, turning the bonds of trust and teaching into weapons of assassination. Os Willem, who had once been Thon's apprentice, arrived on Ambria accompanied by Credo, another fallen Jedi seeking to prove his loyalty to the Sith cause. The attack on Ambria became one of the war's most dramatic confrontations. Willem, possessed by Sith corruption, summoned dark side creatures called Hesisas to assault his former master. These reptilian predators, enhanced by dark side energy, represented exactly the kind of threat that Thon had spent decades learning to counter on his adopted homeworld. But Thon wasn't alone in this fight. Nomi Sunrider had brought her young daughter Vima to visit the master who had trained her, and they were joined by Silvar, a Cathar Jedi whose own people had suffered under Mandalorian genocide. When the Sith assault began, these defenders rallied around Thon, using the very techniques he had taught them to counter the dark side attack. Nomi's battle meditation proved crucial in coordinating their defense, while Silvar's lightsaber skills kept the Hasis creatures at bay. Master Thon himself demonstrated why he was considered one of the Order's greatest experts on dark side corruption, using his deep understanding of how darkness operated to turn Willum's own techniques against him. The confrontation ended with Thon successfully incapacitating his former apprentice, though the corruption that had claimed Willum proved irreversible. Silvar managed to scar Credo's face before he escaped, marking him as a fallen Jedi for all to see. Most importantly, the successful defense of Ambria proved that even the Sith's most carefully planned assassinations could be thwarted when Jedi worked together and relied on their training. The war reached its climax when Ulic Qel-Droma led a daring assault on Coruscant itself, hoping to decapitate the Republic leadership in a single decisive strike. Mandalorian warriors and Krath forces descended on the galactic capital, fighting their way through planetary defenses toward the Senate building. After fierce fighting, Ulic was captured by the Jedi and put on trial for his crimes against the Republic. During Ulic's trial in the Senate Hall, Exar Kun made a dramatic entrance with his Massassi warriors and Mandalore the Indomitable. Using Sith magic to freeze the assembled senators, Kun freed his apprentice and murdered Supreme Chancellor Sidrona in front of the entire Republic government. As the two Sith lords prepared to leave, they were confronted by Master Vodo Siosk Bas, who had come to Coruscant to petition the Senate about the ongoing Sith attacks. The reunion between master and former apprentice became a lightsaber duel in the heart of the Republic's government. Vodo attempted to reason with Kun, trying to bring him back to the light, but the fallen Jedi had traveled too far down the dark path. Kun revealed his new weapon, a double-bladed lightsaber of his own design, and struck down his former master in cold blood. This act completed Kun's break from everything he had once been cementing his transformation into a dark Lord of the Sith. But the attack on Coruscant also brought Ulic face to face with the personal cost of his choices. When confronted by his brother Kel Droma and Nomi Sunrider, both of whom still hoped to save him from the dark side, Ulic's rage exploded. When Kay refused to stand aside, Ulic struck him down with his lightsaber, killing his own brother in a moment of fury. The horror of fratricide broke something fundamental in Ulic's psyche. For the first time since his corruption began, he fully understood what he had become and what he had lost. Overcome by grief and self-loathing, Ulic surrendered to the Jedi who had come to stop him. His capture represented a major victory for the Republic and a devastating blow to the Brotherhood's leadership. With Ulic in Republic custody, Exar Kun was forced to execute alternative plans that had been prepared for such contingencies. He manipulated Alima Keto into using an ancient Sith weapon called the Dark Staff to destroy a star in the Kron cluster. This artificial supernova wiped out Mandalore the Indomitable and much of the Republic fleet pursuing him, but it also set off a chain reaction that threatened nearby systems. The supernova's expanding shockwave was heading directly toward Ossus, the ancient repository of Jedi knowledge. Recognizing both opportunity and necessity, Exar Kun led his Massassi forces to Ossus to plunder the archives before the planet was destroyed. His raid succeeded in capturing countless holocrons and artifacts, but it also forced the Jedi to evacuate their most sacred site. Jedi Master Ood Benar made the ultimate sacrifice to protect some of the most valuable texts, using his unique biology to transform into a tree that covered and shielded the Great Library. Though Kun escaped with vast amounts of stolen knowledge, the loss of Ossus represented a spiritual and practical disaster for the Jedi Order that would take centuries to fully overcome. As his forces dwindled and his strategic situation became hopeless, Exar Kun retreated to his stronghold on Yavin 4 for a final desperate gambit. Using techniques learned from ancient Sith texts, he performed a massive ritual that sacrificed thousands of Massassi warriors to channel their life force. His goal was to achieve a form of immortality that would allow him to survive physical defeat. When Ulic Qel-Droma revealed Exar Kun's location on Yavin 4, the Jedi leaders acted quickly to organize a final assault. Master Thon and Nomi Sunrider took joint command of the Republic Rim Fleet, coordinating the largest Jedi military operation since the Great Hyperspace War. Their combined leadership brought together surviving Jedi from across the galaxy for one decisive battle. The Jedi strike force that arrived at Yavin 4 found themselves facing not just a military opponent, but a spiritual one. Kun had succeeded in severing his spirit from his physical body, trapping his consciousness within the ancient temples of Yavin 4 as his body was destroyed by the Jedi assault. In response to this dark ritual, the assembled Jedi created something equally powerful on the side of light. Master Thon was among those who participated in forming the Wall of Light, a collaborative force technique that combined the power of dozens of Jedi to contain Exar Kun's spirit and prevent it from escaping to corrupt other worlds. The collision between Kun's dark side ritual and the Jedi's Wall of Light created a devastating firestorm that swept across Yavin 4's surface. Master Thon and the other Jedi were stunned by the destructive power they had helped unleash, wondering what the ultimate cost of their victory would prove to be. They had saved the galaxy from Sith domination, but at the price of an entire world. With Exar Kun's physical death, the Great Sith War finally ended. The Republic had survived its greatest test since the Hyperspace War, but the cost had been enormous. The Jedi Order had lost many of its brightest members, either to death in battle or corruption by the dark side. Ossus lay in ruins, its irreplaceable archives scattered or destroyed. The war's aftermath reshaped galactic politics in ways that would influence events for decades to come. Ulic Qel-Droma, though spared execution, was stripped of his Force abilities by Nomi Sunrider and exiled from civilized space. The Mandalorians, leaderless after their defeat, began rebuilding under a new leader called Mandalore the Ultimate, who would eventually pose his own threat to galactic peace. Master Thon survived the conflict and continued to serve the Jedi Order in the years that followed. A decade after the war's end, he attended the conclave on Exis Station, where his former apprentice Nomi Sunrider, now the head of the Jedi Order, discussed the future direction of their rebuilt organization. His presence at this gathering represented the continuity between the old Jedi traditions and the new approaches that would be needed to prevent future catastrophes. Most significantly, the Great Sith War established patterns that would define the Old Republic timeline for the next several millennia. Fallen Jedi had proven capable of nearly toppling galactic civilization when they combined individual power with organizational skills and ancient knowledge. The dark side's ability to corrupt even the most dedicated protectors had been demonstrated on a scale that terrified the surviving Jedi leadership. The stage was now set for the next phase of the Old Republic's history, where the lessons learned from the Great Sith War would be tested by new threats emerging from unexpected directions. The galaxy had survived its encounter with the Brotherhood of the Sith, but the fundamental conflicts between light and dark, order and chaos, remained unresolved. The galaxy's greatest hero was about to become its worst nightmare. But first, he had to win a war that nobody wanted to fight. In the decades following the Great Sith War, the Republic entered what historians call the Restoration Period. Worlds devastated by Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma slowly rebuilt their cities and governments. The Jedi Order, now led by figures like Nomi Sunrider, worked to heal the trauma left by seeing so many of their own fall to darkness. It seemed like peace might finally last. But while the Republic focused on healing, a different kind of threat was gathering strength in the shadows. The Mandalorians, those nomadic warriors who had briefly allied with the Sith Brotherhood, had found a new leader who would reshape their entire culture. Mandalore the Ultimate took his title seriously, believing he could surpass all previous Mandalorian leaders through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance. Unlike his predecessors, Mandalore the Ultimate had a vision that went beyond simple raiding and conquest. He wanted to unite all Mandalorian clans under a single banner and test their strength against the greatest military force in the galaxy. The Republic had defeated every enemy it had faced, from ancient Sith Empires to fallen Jedi movements. Could the Mandalorians succeed where others had failed? Unknown to anyone in the Republic, Mandalore the Ultimate was receiving guidance from a mysterious advisor who encouraged his ambitions. This shadowy figure, later revealed to be an agent of Sith Emperor Vitiate, pushed the Mandalorians toward war for reasons that wouldn't become clear for decades. The manipulation was subtle but effective, feeding Mandalore's natural desire for glory while steering him toward targets that would serve hidden Sith purposes. Mandalore began secretly gathering forces on Duxon, that beast-infested moon orbiting Onderon, where so much dark side history had unfolded. The choice of base wasn't accidental. Duxon's dangerous wildlife provided perfect training for warriors who needed to be ready for anything. More importantly, its isolation kept Mandalorian military preparations hidden from Republic intelligence. The warriors who answered Mandalore's call were different from the raiders who had fought alongside Ulic Qel-Droma. These Neo-Crusaders wore distinctive armor that marked them as part of a unified military force rather than independent clans. They shared a common purpose and fighting doctrine that made them far more dangerous than scattered tribal warriors. When the Mandalorians struck, the Republic was completely unprepared. The Battle of Althea marked the beginning of what would become known as the Mandalorian Wars, though at first it seemed like just another border skirmish. Republic commanders assumed they were dealing with typical Mandalorian raids that could be handled by local defense forces. They were wrong. The Mandalorian assault targeted fringe worlds that had been weakened by the recent Sith War, hitting planets where Republic defenses were minimal and recovery was still ongoing. These initial attacks revealed a level of coordination and strategic planning that Republic military analysts had never seen from Mandalorian forces. The Neo-Crusaders didn't just conquer worlds, they systematically gathered resources, recruited new warriors, and established supply lines that could support extended campaigns. This wasn't random pillaging, but organized military expansion designed to build momentum for larger operations. As Mandalorian forces pushed deeper into Republic space, their tactics became increasingly brutal. The warrior culture that valued strength above all else had no patience for enemies who wouldn't submit quickly. Around this time period, Mandalorian strategist Cassus Fett led an assault on the planet Cathar that would become one of the war's most horrific moments. The Cathar had resisted an earlier Mandalorian incursion, managing to drive off the attackers through clever defensive tactics. To Mandalorian thinking, this resistance was an insult that demanded punishment. Fett's forces didn't just conquer Cathar, they committed systematic genocide, slaughtering 90% of the Cathar species as an example to other worlds. This atrocity demonstrated that the Mandalorians were waging total war without any regard for civilian casualties or basic rules of conflict. Entire species could be wiped out if they showed insufficient respect for Mandalorian military superiority. The massacre on Cathar would haunt the galaxy for decades to come, serving as evidence of what happened when warrior cultures were allowed to pursue conquest without moral restraints. Meanwhile, the Republic Navy struggled to mount an effective defense against enemies who seemed to understand their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Mandalorian forces advanced along 3 separate invasion corridors, stretching Republic defenses thin and preventing concentrated responses to any single threat. As Republic governors sent increasingly desperate pleas for help, the Jedi Council on Coruscant found itself facing a terrible dilemma. The Order was still recovering from the trauma of the Great Sith War, where so many Jedi had fallen to darkness or died in combat. Council members feared that another major conflict might lead to similar corruption, especially if it required the aggressive tactics that seemed necessary to stop the Mandalorians. The Council's response was cautious to the point of paralysis. They sent a few Jedi advisors to help with Republic defense efforts, but they refused to commit the Order to full military intervention. From their perspective, the Mandalorian threat might be a cover for some deeper Sith manipulation, and involving the Jedi directly could be playing into enemy hands. This hesitation infuriated many younger Jedi who were watching worlds burn while their leaders debated philosophy. Among these frustrated idealists was a charismatic knight who became known as the Revanchist because of his advocacy for immediate Jedi action. His real name was forgotten as he embraced this identity, eventually becoming simply Revan. By 3963, the Mandalorian advance had reached a critical phase that Republic commanders called the Mandalorian Triumph. Neo-Crusader forces broke through Republic lines in multiple sectors simultaneously, overwhelming defenders who had been expecting gradual escalation rather than coordinated assault. The Ecumenopolis of Taris came under siege as Mandalorian bombardment turned the city planet into a war zone. Taris was particularly vulnerable because its population was concentrated in massive urban structures that made evacuation impossible. Mandalorian attacks on the upper levels sent refugees flooding into the lower city, where existing tensions between different social classes exploded into open gang warfare. The planet became a symbol of how quickly civilization could collapse when faced with determined attackers. The destruction of Sirocco demonstrated the Mandalorians' willingness to use any weapon necessary to achieve victory. When Republic defenders and a Duros colony on the planet mounted stronger resistance than expected, Mandalorian forces responded with nuclear bombardment that wiped out all opposition along with most of the civilian population. These tactics shocked a galaxy that had grown accustomed to conflicts with at least some limits on acceptable targets and methods. The Mandalorians fought as if rules of war didn't exist, treating civilian populations as legitimate military targets if they supported Republic resistance in any way. Soon enough, Mandalorian forces had conquered systems as far into Republic space as Duro, bringing the war dangerously close to the core worlds where galactic civilization was centered. The Republic faced the real possibility of total military defeat, yet the Jedi Council still refused to authorize full Order involvement in the conflict. This deadlock finally broke when Revan and his close friend Alec, later known as Malak, gathered like-minded Jedi into a dissident movement that became known as the Revanchists. These younger Jedi were determined to act even if it meant defying the Council's direct orders. The Revanchists began investigating Mandalorian war crimes, hoping to find evidence that would convince the Council of the threat's urgency. Their breakthrough came when Revan discovered a Mandalorian mask that had belonged to a slain Cathar warrior. When Revan touched the mask, he experienced a powerful Force vision that showed him the genocide Cassius Fett had committed on Cathar. Armed with this horrific evidence, Revan presented the case for Jedi intervention to the Council with an emotional power that couldn't be ignored. The systematic extermination of an entire species went beyond military necessity into pure evil. Even the most cautious Council members had to admit that such atrocities demanded a response. Bowing to growing pressure from both the Revanchists and public opinion, the Council grudgingly authorized Jedi participation in the war effort. But they made it clear that this was an exception and that the Jedi involved would be held accountable for their actions. Revan formally adopted his Revanchist identity as his true name, casting aside whatever he had been called before his crusade began. Alec similarly took the name Malak, symbolizing their shared commitment to this cause above all others. Together they led hundreds of young Jedi to the front lines of a war that would change them in ways they couldn't foresee. The Jedi intervention proved immediately decisive. At the Battle of Duro, Revan demonstrated tactical genius that halted the Mandalorian advance for the first time since the war began. His forces used interdictor-class cruisers to trap Mandalorian fleets in real space, preventing the hit-and-run tactics that had made the Neo-Crusaders so effective. More importantly, Revan showed an intuitive understanding of Mandalorian psychology that allowed him to predict their movements and counter their strategies. Where Republic commanders had been reactive, always responding to Mandalorian initiatives, Revan began taking control of the war's tempo and forcing the enemy to respond to his plans. Supreme Chancellor Tol Cressa was so impressed by this performance that he appointed Revan as Supreme Commander of the Republic military, giving him authority over all forces fighting the Mandalorians. This decision would have consequences that reached far beyond the current conflict, as it placed enormous power in the hands of someone who had already shown willingness to defy authority when he believed it necessary. With Revan in command and Malak serving as his primary general, the Republic finally went on the offensive. Throughout 3961 BBY, they systematically liberated planet after planet from Mandalorian occupation. But Revan's methods troubled many of the Jedi who served under him, as he showed no hesitation about using tactics that skirted the edge of what the Order considered acceptable. When civilian populations were caught between Republic and Mandalorian forces, Revan was willing to sacrifice them if it meant achieving strategic objectives. When enemy strongholds were too costly to assault directly, he would bombard them from orbit regardless of collateral damage. These moral shortcuts achieved results, but they came at the cost of the principles that were supposed to separate Jedi from their enemies. The campaign to liberate Taris became legendary for both its success and the methods used to achieve it. Revan's forces broke the Mandalorian siege through a combination of direct assault and psychological warfare that left the planet free but traumatized. Similar victories at Onderon and Duxon pushed the Neo-Crusaders back toward their original territories. As the war turned against them, the Mandalorians began to understand that they faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Revan seemed to anticipate their strategies before they could implement them, and his willingness to match their brutality with calculated ruthlessness neutralized many of their psychological advantages. The final confrontation came at Malachor V, a world that carried dark side significance from ancient conflicts. Revan chose this location deliberately, understanding that its spiritual corruption would affect both sides, but believing he could use that energy more effectively than his enemies. The trap Revan set for the Mandalorian Armada was perhaps the most audacious military operation in galactic history. He challenged Mandalore the Ultimate to personal combat on the planet's surface, while positioning his fleet to destroy both armies if necessary. The Republic forces were largely unaware that their commander was prepared to sacrifice them along with the enemy. Above Malachor V, Revan's trusted general Mitra Surik activated the Mass Shadow Generator, a superweapon that created gravitational anomalies capable of tearing apart space-time itself. The device annihilated most of the Mandalorian fleet and a large portion of Republic forces in a catastrophic implosion that shattered the planet's surface. On the ground, Revan faced Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat that would determine the war's outcome. The Mandalorian leader was a formidable warrior, but Revan had been changed by the conflict in ways that made him more dangerous than any traditional Jedi. When Mandalore fell to Revan's lightsaber, the Mandalorian cause died with him. In his final moments, Mandalore the Ultimate revealed something that would haunt Revan for the rest of his life. The Mandalorian leader admitted that he had been manipulated by a hidden Sith influence, that their entire war had been orchestrated by enemies who remained in the shadows. The Republic's victory was real, but it had been part of someone else's larger plan. Revan took Mandalore's mask as a symbol of his victory, but also to prevent any immediate successor from claiming the title. With their leader dead and their armies destroyed, the surviving Mandalorians surrendered unconditionally. Some became wandering mercenaries, others went into hiding, but their culture of organized conquest was broken. The Republic celebrated Revan as its greatest hero, the savior who had ended a threat that could have destroyed galactic civilization. But the victory came at a terrible price that wouldn't be fully understood for years. Many of the Jedi who had followed Revan were traumatized by the violence they had witnessed and participated in. Others had been tempted by the power that came from embracing darker emotions and methods. The Jedi Council's worst fears had been realized. Involvement in the war had indeed corrupted many of their members, though perhaps not in the ways they had expected. The trauma of watching comrades die at Malak 5 would drive some Jedi to abandon the Force entirely, while others began questioning whether the Order's traditional limitations were adequate for protecting the galaxy. Most ominously, Revan himself had been changed by his experiences in ways that even he didn't fully understand. The revelation that the entire war had been orchestrated by hidden Sith forces filled him with determination to seek out these enemies and destroy them before they could threaten the Republic again. This noble goal would lead him and Malak into the unknown regions, pursuing whispers and hints about the true enemy behind the Mandalorian aggression. The Mandalorian Wars had ended with complete Republic victory, but they had also set in motion events that would soon threaten everything they had fought to protect. The stage was set for the next phase of the Old Republic timeline, where heroes would become villains, and the galaxy would learn that sometimes winning a war only creates greater dangers. The Republic's greatest hero vanished into the unknown regions and returned as its worst enemy. When Revan came back from his hunt for the hidden Sith, he brought with him the means to destroy everything he had once fought to protect. After their victory on Malak 5, Revan and Malak should have returned to Coruscant as conquering heroes. The Republic was ready to shower them with honors and gratitude for ending the Mandalorian threat. Instead, they disappeared into uncharted space, taking with them a fleet of loyal Republic forces and the revanchist Jedi who had followed them throughout the war. Their official mission was to pursue rumors of the true Sith who had manipulated Mandalore the Ultimate. Revan had become obsessed with the dying Mandalorian leader's final words about hidden enemies pulling strings from the shadows. He believed that defeating the Mandalorians was only the first step in protecting the Republic from a much larger threat. The truth was far more dangerous than anyone suspected. Revan had pieced together fragments of ancient lore and modern intelligence to track down clues about Sith Emperor Vishiet, the immortal ruler who had been building power in secret for over 1,000 years. When Revan and Malak finally reached Dromund Kaas, they thought they were prepared to face whatever they might find. They were wrong. Vishiet had spent centuries perfecting techniques for dominating other Force users, and he immediately recognized the potential in these two powerful Jedi. Rather than killing them outright, the Emperor ensnared their minds, turning them toward the dark side while convincing them they were acting of their own free will. The corruption process was subtle and gradual, making Revan and Malak believe they were learning valuable intelligence about Sith operations rather than being transformed into pawns. Vitiate sent them back toward Republic space with false memories and hidden programming, intending to use them as unwitting agents who would weaken the Republic from within. During their journey home, Revan and Malak made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the unknown regions was the Star Forge, a massive space station built by the ancient Infinite Empire. This technological marvel could manufacture unlimited ships and droids by drawing energy directly from nearby stars, but it required dark side power to operate effectively. The Star Forge represented exactly the kind of superweapon that could tip the balance of galactic power. More importantly, exposure to its dark energies accelerated the corruption that Vitiate had planted in their minds. By the time they fully understood what they had found, Revan and Malak had broken free of the Emperor's direct control but fallen completely to the dark side. They crowned themselves Darth Revan and Darth Malak, abandoning their Jedi identities and embracing Sith philosophy with the fervor of true converts. But unlike previous Sith lords who had inherited existing empires, they planned to build their own power base using the Star Forge's unlimited production capabilities. The Star Forge didn't just manufacture ships and weapons. It created an entire infrastructure for conquest, producing everything from fighter craft to capital ships to support equipment. Within months, Revan and Malak commanded a fleet larger than anything the Republic had seen since the Great Hyperspace War. They recruited crews from multiple sources, starting with Republic soldiers who had followed them into the unknown regions and had been gradually corrupted by prolonged exposure to dark side influences. Former revanchist Jedi provided force-using officers and commanders. They also found remnants of the old Sith Empire and various military forces they encountered during their travels. This massive armada emerged from the Outer Rim and struck the Republic without warning. The conflict that followed became known as the Jedi Civil War, though many also called it the Second Sith War. The name reflected how the galaxy perceived the crisis as rogue Jedi turning against their former allies. The Sith strategy was methodical and devastating. Rather than attempting to conquer territory directly, they targeted the Republic's industrial and military infrastructure. Shipyards, supply depots, and strategic systems came under assault from forces that seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The Battle of Furost became a perfect example of this approach. Revan's forces seized the Republic's largest shipyard complex and captured hundreds of capital ships that had been under construction or repair. This single operation doubled the size of the Sith fleet while simultaneously crippling the Republic's ability to replace losses. Leading many of these attacks was Admiral Saul Karath, a respected Republic officer who had defected to the Sith cause. Karath's intimate knowledge of Republic defensive systems made him invaluable to Revan's planning, while his reputation helped convince other officers that the Sith offered a better path forward than the corrupt Republic government. The bombardment of Telos IV demonstrated the ruthless efficiency that characterized Darth Revan's campaign. When the planet's defenders proved more stubborn than expected, Karath's forces simply bombarded the surface from orbit until nothing remained alive. This wasn't conquest, but annihilation, designed to terrorize other worlds into surrendering without resistance. The psychological impact of seeing Revan and Malak leading the enemy forces was devastating for Republic morale. These were the heroes who had saved the galaxy from the Mandalorians, now turned against everything they had once protected. Many Republic soldiers found themselves unable to fight effectively against commanders they had served under and respected. Defections became a serious problem as disillusioned Republic personnel joined the Sith in increasing numbers. Some were motivated by pragmatic calculations about which side was likely to win. Others genuinely believed that Revan's authoritarian efficiency was superior to the Republic's slow democratic processes. After 2 years of systematic destruction, the Sith controlled most of the outer and mid-rim territories, while Republic forces retreated toward the core worlds. The Jedi Order had been particularly hard hit, with hundreds of knights either killed in battle or seduced to the dark side by former comrades who understood their weaknesses and motivations. By the end of the second year, the Republic faced imminent defeat unless something dramatic changed the strategic situation. The Jedi Council, reduced to a handful of surviving masters, developed a desperate plan that would determine the war's outcome. They would target Darth Revan himself, believing that his death or capture might cause the Sith Empire to collapse. Jedi Knight Bastila Shan led the strike team assigned to this impossible mission. Bastila possessed a rare gift called battle meditation that allowed her to influence the morale and combat effectiveness of entire fleets through the Force. Her abilities made her one of the few Jedi who might be able to penetrate Revan's defenses and reach his flagship. The ambush succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but not for the reasons the Jedi had planned. As Darth Revan faced capture aboard his command ship, his apprentice Malak made a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Rather than attempting a rescue, Malak ordered his own vessel to fire on Revan's bridge, hoping to kill his master and claim sole leadership of the Sith Empire. The betrayal was perfectly timed and completely ruthless, embodying everything the Sith philosophy taught about power belonging to those strong enough to seize it. Malak's bombardment critically injured Revan and destroyed most of his flagship's command structure, leaving the Dark Lord helpless before the Jedi strike team. Bastila Shan found herself in an impossible situation. Her mission had been to kill or capture Revan, but she discovered that a Force bond had formed between them during their confrontation. This mystical connection allowed her to sense the conflict still raging within the fallen Jedi's mind, suggesting that some part of his original personality might survive beneath the Sith corruption. Rather than allowing Revan to die from his injuries, Bastila used her abilities to stabilize his condition and brought him before the Jedi Council. The surviving masters faced an agonizing decision about what to do with the comatose Dark Lord who had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. After intense debate, they chose an approach that was either merciful redemption or terrifying violation, depending on your perspective. Using techniques drawn from the deepest archives of Force knowledge, the Council wiped Revan's memories completely and implanted a new identity as a Republic soldier serving under Bastila's supervision. Their hope was that the original Revan might reassert itself if given the chance, and that his knowledge of Sith operations could be turned against his former empire. It was an enormous gamble that violated fundamental principles about personal autonomy and the nature of identity, but the Council felt they had no other choice. To the galaxy at large, Darth Revan was presumed dead in the battle that had crippled his flagship. This assumption allowed Darth Malak to seize undisputed control of the Sith Empire and begin implementing his own vision for the war's conclusion. Unfortunately for the Republic, Malak's approach was far more brutal than anything Revan had attempted. Where Revan had been calculating and strategic, preferring to convert or intimidate enemies rather than simply destroying them, Malak embraced annihilation as his primary tactic. He understood that fear could be a more effective weapon than actual military force. and he set out to demonstrate the price of continued resistance. The destruction of Taris became the defining atrocity of Malak's reign as Dark Lord. When he learned that Bastila Shan was hiding somewhere on the massive city planet, he decided that finding her was less important than making an example. Sith forces bombarded Taris from orbit for days, reducing the entire world to rubble and killing billions of inhabitants. This act of genocide served no strategic purpose beyond terrorism. Taris had already been under Sith control, and its destruction actually eliminated valuable resources and infrastructure. But Malak calculated that the psychological impact of annihilating an entire world would break Republic resistance more effectively than conventional conquest. While Taris burned, the amnesiac Revan was beginning a journey that would lead him back to his true identity. Accompanied by Bastila Shan and a growing group of companions, he searched for ancient artifacts called star maps that would reveal the location of the Star Forge. The irony was deliberate. The Jedi Council hoped that retracing his steps as a Sith Lord might awaken Revan's memories and provide intelligence about enemy operations. The quest took them to worlds across the galaxy, from the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine to the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, to the ancient Sith burial grounds on Korriban. Each location held pieces of the puzzle that would eventually lead to the Star Forge, but they also contained echoes of Revan's dark past that gradually began to surface in his consciousness. Malak's forces pursued them relentlessly, understanding that these star maps were crucial to maintaining Sith power. The Dark Lord even destroyed the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine rather than risk losing control of the artifact hidden there, eliminating one of the last major centers of Jedi learning in the galaxy. The cat-and-mouse game between hunter and hunted reached its climax when Malak captured Bastila Shan and attempted to turn her to the dark side. Using a combination of torture, temptation, and manipulation, he succeeded in corrupting the Jedi Knight and turning her into a dark Jedi who served his cause. Bastila's fall was particularly devastating because her battle meditation abilities made her a powerful weapon against the Republic fleet. Her presence at Malak's side tipped the balance of space combat decisively in favor of the Sith, threatening to end the war through simple attrition of Republic naval forces. But Malak's triumph was short-lived. The redeemed Revan had gradually reclaimed enough of his memories and abilities to pose a serious threat to the Sith Empire he had created. More importantly, he understood the strategic and personal weaknesses that could be exploited to bring down his former apprentice. The final confrontation came at the Star Forge itself, hidden in the Lahon system where the ancient Rakata had once ruled their infinite empire. The Republic fleet, led by Admiral Thorn Dodonna and supported by Jedi survivors like Jolee Bindo, engaged Malak's armada in a battle that would determine the war's outcome. Initially, the Sith held every advantage. Bastila's battle meditation gave their forces coordination and morale that the Republic couldn't match, while the Star Forge continued producing reinforcements to replace any losses. But Revan had learned enough about himself and his past to understand how these systems could be turned against their current masters. In a personal confrontation aboard the Star Forge, Revan managed to redeem Bastila Shan, breaking Malak's hold over her mind and restoring her to the light side. With battle meditation now supporting the Republic fleet instead of the Sith, the strategic balance shifted dramatically in favor of the attackers. The duel between Revan and Malak was as much about philosophy as swordsmanship. Two former friends and allies, one seeking redemption and the other committed to domination, fought with lightsabers amid the industrial machinery that had made their war possible. Malak had grown stronger since their apprentice days, but Revan's return to the light side had restored abilities and insights that pure dark side power couldn't match. When Malak finally fell, his dying words expressed regret for how far they had both fallen from their original ideals. The tragedy of the Jedi Civil War wasn't just the billions of deaths or the destruction of worlds, but the corruption of heroes who had started with noble intentions. With their leader dead and their primary asset destroyed by the victorious Republic fleet, the Sith Empire collapsed almost instantly. The Star Forge's destruction ended their ability to replace losses, while Malak's death eliminated the central authority that had held the various Sith factions together. The war ended with Revan restored to the light side and hailed as the Republic's savior for the second time. But victory came at an almost impossible price. The Jedi Order had been reduced from thousands of members to fewer than 100 survivors. Entire worlds lay in ruins. The Republic's political and economic systems had been severely damaged by years of total war. In the aftermath of Malak's defeat, the surviving Sith Empire fragmented into competing factions ruled by ambitious warlords. This Sith Civil War created chaos throughout former Sith territory as Dark Jedi and Sith Lords fought each other for control of the remnants. Most dangerously, 3 of the most cunning Sith survivors had already begun forming an alliance that would prove more threatening than Revan and Malak's empire. Darth Traya, Darth Sion, and Darth Nihilus established themselves as the Sith Triumvirate, operating from hidden bases like the Treyus Academy on the ruins of Malachor V. These 3 Sith Lords had learned from their predecessors' mistakes and developed a more subtle approach to destroying their enemies. Rather than attempting open conquest, they would systematically hunt down and eliminate the surviving Jedi, striking from the shadows until the Order was completely extinct. The Republic leadership, exhausted by years of warfare and desperate for peace, failed to recognize the continuing threat posed by the Sith Triumvirate. They assumed that the scattered warlords would eliminate each other through infighting, never suspecting that the most dangerous enemies were operating in complete secrecy. The stage was set for the next phase of the Old Republic timeline, where the Jedi would face their greatest test yet. Having survived external conquest and internal corruption, they would now confront enemies dedicated to their complete annihilation. The question was whether the few dozen surviving Jedi could rebuild their order quickly enough to face this new threat, or whether the ancient guardians of peace would finally be eliminated forever. The Jedi Order was about to face extinction, not through war or conquest, but through something far more terrifying. They were being hunted to death, one, by enemies who fed on the Force itself. While the Republic celebrated the end of the Jedi Civil War, 3 Sith Lords had been quietly positioning themselves to finish what Revan and Malak had started. Darth Traya, Darth Sion, and Darth Nihilus formed the Sith Triumvirate with a goal that went beyond conquest or power. They wanted to completely eradicate the Jedi Order from existence. These Shadow Masters launched what became known as the First Jedi Purge. This wasn't another galactic war with fleets and armies. This was systematic extermination carried out by assassins who struck from darkness and vanished without trace. The few surviving Jedi who had rebuilt after Malak's defeat suddenly found themselves being murdered in ways that seemed impossible. Sith assassins trained in stealth and concealment spread across the galaxy like a plague. They used techniques that made them nearly invisible to Force detection, allowing them to get close to Jedi who thought they were safe. These killers were patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless in their efficiency. But the most terrifying member of the triumvirate was Darth Nihilus, a being who had been transformed by his experiences at Malachor V into something that was barely alive in any conventional sense. Nihilus possessed a hunger that could never be satisfied. He literally consumed Force energy, draining the life from everything around him to feed an endless void within his spirit. When Nihilus targeted a Jedi outpost, there would be no bodies left behind, no evidence of struggle or violence. Entire communities would simply vanish, their life force absorbed by a creature who had become a wound in the Force itself. The few witnesses who glimpsed him described a figure in dark robes whose very presence seemed to drain hope and vitality from the air. Darth Sion brought a different kind of horror to the hunt. An undead Sith Lord whose shattered body was held together by pure hatred and pain, Sion could not be killed by conventional means. He pursued his targets with relentless determination, tracking them across the galaxy until he could personally strangle the life from them with his bare hands. The third member of their triumvirate was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Darth Traya, also known as Kreia, was a former Jedi Master who had turned to the dark side after becoming disillusioned with both philosophies. Her weapon wasn't brute force or supernatural hunger, but manipulation and betrayal. Traya could turn allies against each other, corrupt the pure-hearted, and twist noble intentions into destructive actions. By this time, the Jedi Council had been reduced to almost nothing. Masters who had survived the Civil War were now dead or missing, their locations discovered by enemies who seemed to know their every move. Communication between surviving Jedi broke down as they realized that any attempt to contact each other might be intercepted and used against them. The few remaining Jedi Masters made a desperate decision. They would gather secretly on Katar, a remote colony world inhabited by the Miraluka species, hoping to coordinate some kind of defense against their mysterious hunters. Masters Atris, Zez-Kai El, Kavar, and Vruk Lamar attended this clandestine meeting, representing the last organized leadership of their order. The conclave was intended to be a planning session, a chance for the survivors to pool their knowledge and develop strategies for fighting back. Instead, it became the greatest single catastrophe in Jedi history. Darth Nihilus sensed the concentration of Force energy represented by so many powerful Jedi gathering in one place. Nihilus traveled to Katar and unleashed his terrible hunger on a scale never before witnessed. He didn't just kill the Jedi Masters who had gathered there. He consumed all life on the entire planet, draining every living being from the smallest microorganism to the largest predator. The Miraluka population, an entire species gifted with natural Force sensitivity, was wiped out in a matter of hours. Only one being survived the feeding frenzy. Visas Mar, a young Miraluka woman, was spared by Nihilus and taken as his apprentice, though whether this was mercy or cruelty remained unclear. With the devastation of Katar, the Jedi Order was effectively finished. The galaxy believed the ancient guardians of peace and justice had finally been eliminated after millennia of protecting civilization. Those few Jedi who remained alive went into deep hiding, severing their connections to the Force and abandoning their identities to avoid detection. Into this darkness stepped an unlikely figure who would determine whether the Jedi tradition would survive or perish completely. Mitra Surik, known throughout the galaxy simply as the Exile, had been cast out of the Order years earlier for her role in the Battle of Malak 5. She had been the general who activated the mass shadow generator that ended the Mandalorian Wars but traumatized an entire generation of Jedi. The Exile's connection to the Force had been severed by the trauma of feeling thousands of deaths through her Force bond with the soldiers under her command. Cut off from the power that had defined her life, she had wandered the Outer Rim as an ordinary person, trying to forget what she had lost and what she had done. Around this time, Meetra Surik finally returned to Republic space, only to discover a galaxy where the Jedi had vanished and the Sith Triumvirate was hunting anyone with even potential Force sensitivity. She soon found herself being pursued by the same assassins who had eliminated the rest of her former order. But the Exile had an advantage that her hunters hadn't anticipated. Her severed connection to the Force made her difficult to detect through normal Sith techniques. She appeared as a void rather than a bright beacon of Force energy, allowing her to move through the galaxy without immediately attracting attention. During her journey, she was accompanied by a mysterious figure calling herself Kreia, an elderly woman who claimed to be a former Jedi Master with knowledge of both light and dark side techniques. Kreia offered to help Meetra reconnect with the Force and find the surviving Jedi Masters who might still be alive somewhere in the galaxy. What Meetra didn't realize was that Kreia was actually Darth Traya, the leader of the Sith Triumvirate who had orchestrated the entire Jedi Purge. Traya was playing a complex game that went beyond simple extermination. She wanted to understand the nature of the Force itself and believed that both Jedi and Sith traditions were fundamentally flawed. Under Kreia's guidance, Meetra began gathering companions and gradually rebuilding her connection to the Force. She traveled to worlds where Jedi Masters were rumored to be hiding, facing constant assassination attempts while slowly uncovering the truth about what had happened to her order. The search led her to find 3 surviving council members scattered across the galaxy. Master Zezkai El was hiding on Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon, disguising himself as a refugee. Master Kavar had become a military advisor on Onderon, using his tactical knowledge while concealing his Force abilities. Master Vrook Lamar was on Dantooine, trying to rebuild the destroyed Jedi Enclave in secret. Convincing these masters to come out of hiding required overcoming their deep trauma and paralyzing fear. Each had witnessed the systematic destruction of their order and believed that any attempt to reorganize would only invite more Sith attention. Meetra had to prove that the threat could be faced and defeated. The reunion of the surviving council members at the rebuilt Dantooine Enclave should have been a moment of hope for the Jedi Order. Instead, it became another betrayal orchestrated by Darth Traya. Kreia revealed her true identity and murdered all 3 masters, eliminating the last organized leadership the Jedi possessed. With her deception complete, Traya departed for Malak 5, where she intended to await her former Sith apprentices and complete whatever plan she had been working toward throughout the Purge. Meetra Surik was left alone to face the full might of the Sith Triumvirate with only her companions and her gradually restored Force abilities. The confrontation with Darth Nihilus came when the hunger-driven Sith Lord attempted to consume all life on Telos 4, a world still being restored after Darth Malak's bombardment years earlier. Nihilus sensed the concentration of living beings involved in the restoration project and decided to feed on them as he had fed on Katar. Meetra faced Nihilus in the Battle of Telos 4, Aided by unlikely allies, including Canderous Ordo, the former Mandalorian who had taken the title Mandalore the Preserver, and Visas Mar, Nihilus's own apprentice who had turned against her master. The battle was as much spiritual as physical, with Mitra using her unique nature as a wound in the Force to disrupt Nihilus's feeding abilities. When Nihilus fell, his death freed Visas Mar from the corruption that had enslaved her and eliminated the most destructive member of the Triumvirate. But two more Sith Lords remained, and both were preparing for final confrontations that would determine the fate of the Force itself. Darth Sion, the undead Lord of Pain, faced Mitra at the Traios Academy on Malachor V, the same facility where Darth Traya had established her base of operations. Sion's immortality made him seemingly impossible to defeat through combat, as his hatred and pain would resurrect him no matter how many times he was struck down. But Mitra understood something about Sion that his other enemies had missed. His undeath was a prison as much as a power, trapping him in constant agony with no hope of rest or peace. Through compassion rather than violence, she convinced the tortured Sith Lord to let go of the hatred that sustained him, allowing him to finally die and find the release he had been denied for so long. The final confrontation was with Darth Traya herself, deep within the Traios core, where the Academy's dark side energies were concentrated. This battle was fought with lightsabers, force powers, and competing philosophies as Traya attempted to explain her ultimate plan for the galaxy. She wanted to eliminate the Force entirely, believing that its influence on galactic affairs had caused more suffering than joy. In her view, both Jedi and Sith were slaves to this cosmic power, and true freedom could only come through severing the galaxy's connection to the Force completely. Maitra Surik rejected this philosophy and defeated Traya in combat, but not before receiving cryptic prophecies about threats that would emerge in the future. With Traya's death, the dark side energies that had corrupted Malachor V for centuries finally destabilized, forcing Mitra and her allies to flee as the planet destroyed itself. The destruction of Malachor V marked the end of both the Dark Wars and the Old Sith Wars era that had dominated our Old Republic timeline for nearly 50 years. The deaths of Nihilus, Sion, and Traya eliminated the Sith Triumvirate and ended the first Jedi Purge that had nearly succeeded in making the Jedi extinct. Maitra Surik emerged as one of the last known Jedi in the galaxy, but her companions and the teachings she had passed on ensured that the Order's traditions would survive. Visas Mar, Mikal the Disciple, Atan Rand, and others carried the spark of Jedi knowledge forward, becoming the foundation for rebuilding what had been lost. Around this time, Revan had recovered his memories from the Jedi Civil War and become aware of the continuing threat posed by Sith Emperor Vishit. Despite the danger, he departed known space to finish the fight he had begun years earlier when he first encountered the immortal Emperor in the unknown regions. Maitra Surik eventually followed Revan on this mission, joining him and Lord Scourge in an attempt to assassinate Emperor Vishit. The mission failed catastrophically. Mitra was killed in the ambush, and Revan was captured by the Emperor, who intended to keep him alive for centuries as a source of information and entertainment. Though the assassination attempt failed, Revan's sacrifice succeeded in delaying the Emperor's plans for galactic conquest. The mental influence he was able to exert even as a prisoner helped keep Vishit's attention focused inward, buying the Republic precious time to recover from its recent wars. Because of this, Chancellor Tarsus Valorum was able to declare the Great Peace of the Republic, announcing that the Sith threat had finally been eliminated after millennia of conflict. For the next 3 centuries, the Republic and a slowly rebuilt Jedi Order would enjoy relative tranquility, unaware that their greatest enemy was still growing in power beyond the edges of known space. The few Jedi survivors who emerged from hiding began the slow process of rebuilding their order under Mitra's guidance and example. They had learned hard lessons about the dangers of both isolation and pride, developing new approaches to training and organization that would help them face future challenges. The Dark Wars had tested whether the Jedi tradition could survive the complete destruction of its institutional structure and the systematic murder of its leadership. The answer was yes, but only because extraordinary individuals like Mitra Surik were willing to sacrifice everything to preserve what mattered most about their order's mission. Everything is now set for the next phase of the Old Republic timeline, where a restored Republic and rebuilt Jedi Order would face their ultimate test when Sith Emperor Vitiate finally emerged from the shadows with an empire designed to conquer the galaxy. The peace they were about to enjoy would give them strength for that confrontation, but it would also make them vulnerable to enemies who had spent centuries preparing for war. 300 years of peace ended in a single ambush. After centuries of believing the Sith were extinct, the Republic was about to discover that their greatest enemy had been growing stronger in the darkness all along. While the Republic enjoyed what Chancellor Valorum had called the Great Peace, Emperor Vitiate had been methodically building the most powerful Sith Empire in galactic history. Hidden on Dromund Kaas, in the unknown regions, he had spent 3 centuries eliminating internal dissent, conquering alien species, and constructing a war machine designed for one purpose: total galactic domination. Vitiate had learned from the failures of previous Sith Lords. Rather than rushing into premature conflicts or allowing personal rivalries to weaken his empire, he maintained absolute control through a combination of fear and careful political management. When Darth Nihilus attempted to organize a conspiracy against him, Vitiate crushed the rebellion so thoroughly that no other Sith Lord dared challenge his authority. The Emperor established the Dark Council, a group of 12 powerful Sith Lords who governed different aspects of the Empire under his supreme authority. This system allowed him to delegate administrative responsibilities while maintaining ultimate control over military and strategic decisions. Each council member understood that their position depended entirely on the Emperor's favor. During these centuries of preparation, the Sith Empire expanded far beyond its original territory. They conquered entire species in the unknown regions, forcing them into slavery or military service. Alien technologies were absorbed and improved. Resources from dozens of worlds fueled the construction of the largest fleet in galactic history. Around this time, Vitiate decided the time had come to reclaim the galaxy that his empire had been forced to abandon over 1,000 years earlier. The Republic had grown complacent during the Long Peace, reducing their military forces and focusing on trade and diplomacy. They were completely unprepared for what was about to hit them. The Great Galactic War began without warning when a Sith armada emerged in the Outer Rim and destroyed a Republic military convoy near the Tingle Arm. The attack was so sudden and overwhelming that no Republic survivors remained to report what had happened. When the convoy failed to arrive at its destination, Republic commanders assumed they had encountered pirates or equipment failures. The truth became horrifyingly clear when Sith forces struck Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld that had been abandoned for over a millennium. A small team of Jedi archaeologists who had been studying the ruins were slaughtered without mercy as Imperial troops reclaimed the planet for their Emperor. The message was unmistakable. The Sith had returned from the dead. Republic leaders struggled to comprehend the scope of the threat they faced. Intelligence reports described Sith fleets larger than anything in their records, commanded by Force users whose power had been honed through centuries of training and conquest. The enemy possessed technology that seemed decades ahead of Republic capabilities, backed by resources from unknown sectors. The Imperial strategy was methodical and devastating. Rather than attempting to conquer the entire galaxy at once, Sith forces targeted key trade routes and industrial worlds that would cripple Republic resistance. The Rimma trade route was blockaded by Imperial fleets, cutting off outer rim worlds from the core and creating economic chaos throughout Republic space. Balmorra fell to Imperial assault, giving the Sith control of one of the galaxy's most important droid manufacturing centers. The planet's industrial capacity was immediately converted to producing war machines for the Imperial military, while the population was enslaved or recruited into service. The Republic's first significant victory came at Bothawui, where defenders led by trooper Jace Malcolm managed to repel an Imperial assault. This first battle of Bothawui demonstrated that the Sith could be defeated, but it also revealed the terrifying cost of fighting them. The casualties were enormous, and the Sith responded by sending an even larger force that resulted in an even bloodier second battle of Bothawui. Desperate to maintain momentum, the Sith Empire attempted a bold strike directly into the core worlds. Darth Malgus, one of their most effective military commanders, led an assault on Alderaan, hoping to terrorize the Republic's heart and force a quick surrender. The attack on Alderaan brought together some of the most important figures in this phase of our Old Republic timeline. Jedi Satele Shan, a descendant of Bastila Shan who had fought in the Jedi Civil War, rallied the planet's defenders. Republic elite forces like Havoc Squad provided military expertise that proved crucial in repelling the Imperial assault. Malgus was defeated and forced to retreat, giving the Republic a moral victory that helped maintain public support for continuing the war. But the cost of defending just one world demonstrated how outmatched the Republic was against an enemy that had spent centuries preparing for this conflict. The Sith Empire understood that they needed allies to achieve total victory against a Republic that still controlled most of the galaxy's industrial and population centers. They began covertly supporting the rise of a new Mandalorian leader known as Mandalore the Lesser, hoping to recruit these warrior people as auxiliary forces. Under Imperial influence, the new Mandalore blockaded the Hydian Way, one of the galaxy's most crucial trade routes. This action strangled Republic supply lines and forced military commanders to find alternative logistics networks. The blockade might have been decisive if not for the intervention of a daring smuggler named Hylo Vis, who organized an ambush that destroyed the Mandalorian fleet and reopened the hyperlane. For nearly 3 decades, the Great Galactic War raged across multiple fronts. The Empire scored victories on worlds like Hoth, where they eliminated a Republic outpost. They also conquered strategically important planets like Ord Radama and Sereno after bitter fighting that left both worlds devastated. But the Republic was learning to adapt to their enemies' tactics. They developed new strategies for countering Sith Force powers and began training specialized units to fight alongside Jedi Knights. Most importantly, they maintained control of the core worlds, where most of the galaxy's population and resources were concentrated. By this time, both sides were exhausted by nearly 28 years of continuous warfare. The Republic had lost huge amounts of territory and suffered millions of casualties, but they had prevented the Empire from achieving the quick victory that Vitiate had originally planned. The Sith Empire controlled much of the outer and mid-rim, but their advance had stalled short of the core worlds. It was at this moment that Emperor Vitiate demonstrated the cunning that had made him the most dangerous Sith Lord in history. He offered peace negotiations on Alderaan, knowing that war-weary Republic leaders would jump at the chance to end the bloodshed. While Republic diplomats traveled to Alderaan in good faith, the Emperor prepared the most audacious military operation in galactic history. The sacking of Coruscant caught the Republic completely off guard. While their leadership was focused on peace talks, Darth Malgus led an Imperial strike force directly to the Republic capital. Using intelligence gathered over decades of warfare, the Sith bypassed Coruscant's supposedly impregnable defenses and struck at the heart of galactic civilization. The Jedi Temple, symbol of the Order's commitment to protecting the Republic, was stormed and destroyed by Sith forces who showed no mercy to defenders or civilians. The Senate District was devastated by orbital bombardment. Most shocking of all, the Supreme Chancellor was killed during the assault, decapitating the Republic's government at its most vulnerable moment. With Coruscant under Imperial occupation and its orbital defense platforms controlled by Sith forces, the Republic had no choice but to accept whatever terms the Emperor demanded. The Treaty of Coruscant, signed in 3653, ended the Great Galactic War on terms that were catastrophically unfavorable to the Republic. Massive territorial concessions created a new galactic map where the Sith Empire controlled roughly half of known space. The Republic was reduced to the core worlds and a few scattered territories, while the Empire claimed vast regions that had been part of the Republic for thousands of years. The treaty's signing marked the beginning of the Cold War period that would define galactic politics for the next decade. Open hostilities ended, but both sides began preparing for the inevitable resumption of conflict. Espionage, proxy wars, and political maneuvering replaced direct military confrontation. The Republic used the breathing space to rebuild its military and fortify its remaining territories. They also had to deal with the psychological trauma of losing their capital and seeing their most sacred institutions destroyed. The Jedi Order was forced to relocate to Tython, the ancient homeworld that Grandmaster Satil Shan had recently rediscovered. Establishing a new Jedi temple on Tython was both practical necessity and powerful symbolism. The Jedi were returning to their roots, literally rebuilding on the foundation where their order had originally been created. The temple was completed, providing a new center for training the next generation of Jedi Knights. During the Cold War, numerous flashpoints tested the fragile peace without triggering full-scale war. The Alderaan Civil War erupted as noble houses competed for power, with some receiving Imperial backing in hopes of destabilizing a key Republic world. Mercenary conflicts on Ord Mantell created chaos that both sides tried to exploit. The Empire also launched covert operations designed to strengthen their position for the next war. Imperial intelligence orchestrated gladiatorial games that resulted in a puppet Mandalore being crowned, giving them potential influence over Mandalorian military forces. Similar schemes targeted other independent factions that might prove useful in future conflicts. For about 10 years, this uneasy balance held. Both the Republic and Empire were rebuilding their strength while avoiding actions that would trigger immediate war. But the fundamental issues that had caused the conflict remained unresolved, and it was only a matter of time before hostilities resumed. The Cold War finally collapsed when a series of incidents orchestrated by extremists on both sides reignited open warfare. Dissident Sith like Darth Barris and rogue Jedi created provocations that made peaceful coexistence impossible to maintain. This renewed galactic war saw the Republic beginning to reclaim territory they had lost in the previous conflict. The liberation of Balmorra after decades of Imperial occupation was particularly significant, both strategically and symbolically. It demonstrated that the Empire could be defeated and that Republic forces had learned to fight more effectively. One of the most shocking developments was the discovery that Revan was still alive, preserved by Emperor Vitiate for over 300 years as a source of information and entertainment. When Revan was freed during a battle at the Maelstrom Nebula, he immediately attempted to continue his ancient war against the Sith by seizing control of an ancient Rakatan factory called the Foundry. Revan's plan to use the Foundry to mass-produce droids programmed to kill all Sith and their allies was thwarted by Imperial forces. But his return highlighted how the conflicts of previous eras continued to influence current events. Even after 300 years, the heroes and villains of the Jedi Civil War were still shaping galactic history. The war reached a climax when Emperor Vitiate attempted to perform a ritual that would have consumed all life in the galaxy to fuel his own immortality. A Jedi strike team led by the hero of Tython confronted the Emperor on Dromund Kaas and apparently destroyed his corporeal form, though his spirit managed to survive the encounter. That same year saw Darth Malgus attempt a coup against the Imperial government, declaring a new empire that would reject both Sith and Republic ideologies. Malgus seized the crystal mines on Ilum, but his rebellion was short-lived. In a shocking development, the Republic and Empire formed a temporary alliance to defeat the rogue Sith Lord. The cooperation between traditional enemies demonstrated how the constant warfare was exhausting both sides. Leaders on both sides began to question whether the cycle of conflict was sustainable or whether some form of permanent peace might be possible. These hopes were complicated by the emergence of new threats that forced both powers to reconsider their priorities. The Hutt cartel's invasion of Makeb required joint Republic and Imperial intervention to prevent the crime syndicate from acquiring superweapon-grade materials. Around the same time, ancient Sith known as the Dreadmasters broke free from their prison and began terrorizing both empires from their base on Oricon. These pre-Vitiate Sith Lords represented a threat to the established order that transcended current political boundaries. The most dramatic development came when Revan returned once again, now obsessed with destroying Emperor Vitiate permanently. He rallied followers from both factions into the Order of Revan and attempted to weaponize the dormant Emperor's power on Yavin 4. Revan's final defeat required cooperation between Republic and Imperial heroes who recognized that his plan would have catastrophic consequences regardless of their political loyalties. When Revan was finally killed and found peace in death, his sacrifice inadvertently awakened Vitiate's consciousness. The Emperor's response was swift and horrifying. He consumed all life on the planet Ziost, demonstrating power that made previous Sith atrocities seem insignificant by comparison. The casual annihilation of an entire world shocked both the Republic and Empire into recognizing that they faced a threat beyond their ability to comprehend or control. This revelation set the stage for the next phase of our Old Republic timeline, where an external threat would force the galaxy's traditional enemies to reconsider everything they thought they knew about power, survival, and the price of victory. The eternal empire of Zakuul was about to emerge from the unknown regions with technology and military power that would make both the Republic and Sith Empire irrelevant overnight. A respected Jedi Master was about to plunge the galaxy into 1,000 years of darkness. The final chapter of the Old Republic timeline would begin with betrayal and end with the most dangerous decision in galactic history. After the Eternal Empire's collapse and the gradual decline of Vitiate's Sith Empire, the galaxy had entered what seemed like a permanent age of peace. The Republic colonized new worlds like Naboo. Culture flourished. The Jedi Order thrived in their restored temple on Coruscant. For over 1,500 years, the ancient pattern of Sith resurgence seemed finally broken. But the dark side has a way of finding new vessels when old ones fail. Around this time, that vessel appeared in the most unexpected form. Phannius was everything a Jedi Master should be. Respected by his peers, wealthy from his aristocratic background, and gifted with both political connections and Force abilities. He seemed like the perfect embodiment of what the Order represented. Underneath that perfect surface, however, Phannius harbored doubts about Jedi philosophy that had been growing for years. He studied ancient texts in the temple archives, including restricted materials about Sith teachings that previous generations had preserved for scholarly purposes. The more he learned about the dark side, the more he became convinced that the Jedi were limiting themselves unnecessarily. Phannius began gathering like-minded Jedi who shared his frustrations with the Order's restrictions. These weren't the usual malcontents or failed students who had turned to darkness in previous eras. They were accomplished knights and masters who had begun questioning whether the Jedi approach was truly the best way to serve the galaxy. When Phannius finally revealed his true intentions, 50 Jedi followed him in abandoning the Order. This fourth Great Schism caught the Jedi Council completely off guard. Unlike previous breaks that had involved small groups of extremists, this was a significant portion of the Order's leadership rejecting their most fundamental principles. Phannius took the name Darth Ruin and declared himself the founder of a new Sith movement that would combine ancient dark side teachings with modern insights about galactic politics and warfare. His followers became the first Sith Lords in over 1,000 years, each taking Darth titles and establishing their own power bases throughout Republic space. The new Sith Wars began as a coordinated rebellion against both the Jedi Order and the Republic government. Unlike previous Sith conflicts that had involved external invasions, this threat emerged from within the Republic's own institutions. Darth Ruin and his followers used their knowledge of Republic weaknesses and their political connections to strike at vulnerable targets. But Ruin's movement contained the same fatal flaw that had destroyed previous Sith organizations. The pursuit of individual power inevitably led to betrayal and infighting. After achieving initial victories against unprepared Republic forces, Ruin was killed by his own followers who had grown tired of his ego and ambition. Rather than ending the conflict, Ruin's death simply fractured it into dozens of smaller wars. Individual Sith Lords carved out personal fiefdoms throughout Republic space, each ruling their territory according to dark side principles. What had begun as an organized rebellion became a galaxy-wide cancer that would metastasize for the next millennium. The new Sith Wars differed from previous conflicts in their duration and decentralized nature. Instead of facing a single enemy empire, the Republic found itself fighting countless warlords who emerged, conquered territory, and were eventually defeated, only to be replaced by new threats. The constant warfare gradually wore down Republican institutions and military forces. Around 1750 BBY, one Sith Lord managed to unite enough territory and followers to pose a serious threat to the core worlds. The Dark Underlord assembled an organization called the Black Knights and began terrorizing the Mid-Rim with systematic brutality designed to break civilian morale and military resistance. The Jedi Order rallied against this threat, working alongside unlikely allies, including Mandalorian mercenaries who had their own reasons for opposing Sith expansion. At the Battle of Malrev IV, combined Jedi and Mandalorian forces managed to kill the Dark Underlord and scatter his Black Knights. But victory against one Sith Lord only created opportunities for others to fill the power vacuum. New tyrants rose to replace those who fell, each learning from their predecessors' mistakes while developing their own methods of conquest and oppression. The cycle seemed endless and increasingly destructive. The prolonged warfare had pushed the Republic into what historians call the Republic Dark Age. Huge sections of the outer and mid-rim had fallen under Sith control or become completely lawless as central authority collapsed. Many hyperspace routes were too dangerous to travel, cutting off trade and communication between worlds. The Republic's influence shrank to the core worlds and a few scattered territories where they could still maintain effective government. Entire sectors declared independence or were conquered by local warlords. The Khans sector became a particular horror story when Argazdan despots enslaved multiple worlds, creating suffering that lasted for decades until Jedi intervention finally freed the population. Technology began regressing on some isolated worlds as the infrastructure needed to maintain advanced civilization crumbled under constant warfare. The Jedi Order itself was diminished, with many knights dying in battle or falling to the dark side under the stress of endless conflict. The galaxy's protectors were being ground down by attrition. The situation had become so desperate that a charismatic leader emerged to unite the scattered Sith factions under a single banner. Lord Skier Khan was a former Jedi Master who had fallen to the dark side, but unlike previous Sith Lords, he understood that their traditional emphasis on hierarchy and personal ambition was self-defeating. Khan formed the Brotherhood of Darkness, implementing a radical philosophy that declared all Sith Lords equal. He banned the use of Darth titles to prevent the kind of rivalry that had destroyed previous Sith organizations. The Brotherhood would focus entirely on destroying the Jedi Order rather than competing for personal power. This unified approach proved devastatingly effective. The Brotherhood swept through Rim territories, conquering worlds that had resisted individual Sith Lords for centuries. The Republic's standing army had been virtually eliminated by decades of warfare, forcing the Jedi Order to take direct command of whatever military forces remained. Lord Hoth emerged as the Jedi's primary military leader, gathering surviving knights and Republic militias into an organization called the Army of Light. This force represented the Republic's last hope for defeating the Brotherhood and restoring some semblance of order to the galaxy. The final phase of the new Sith Wars converged on the Ruusan system, an agrarian world that became the decisive battleground for determining the galaxy's future. The Army of Light and Brotherhood of Darkness fought 7 brutal battles across Ruusan's plains. Each engagement saw entire forces obliterated and hastily replenished as both sides threw everything they had into achieving final victory. The fighting was so intense that by the 7th battle, only about 100 combatants remained on each side. These survivors represented the last organized Jedi and Sith forces in the galaxy. Among the Sith fighters was a powerful lord who would reshape galactic history despite never participating in the final battle. Darth Bane had grown increasingly disillusioned with Khan's egalitarian approach to Sith philosophy. He believed that the Brotherhood's emphasis on equality was fundamentally contrary to dark side teachings about strength and domination. Bane had been studying ancient Sith texts and had rediscovered the concept of the Rule of Two, which held that there should only ever be one Sith master and one apprentice at any given time. This approach would concentrate dark side power rather than diluting it among multiple lords who inevitably competed with each other. As the 7th Battle of Ruusan reached its climax, Lord Khan found himself trapped in a cave with the remaining Brotherhood forces, surrounded by the Army of Light. Desperate for some way to achieve victory, or at least deny it to his enemies, Khan decided to activate an ancient Sith superweapon called the Thought Bomb. Darth Bane tried to warn Khan about the weapon's true nature, but the Brotherhood leader ignored these concerns in his determination to destroy the Jedi. The Thought Bomb was designed to annihilate all Force-sensitive beings within its range by literally ripping their souls from their bodies. When the weapon detonated, it killed Lord Hoth and nearly 100 Jedi, along with Khan and the entire Brotherhood of Darkness. The explosion scoured Ruusan's surface and trapped the spirits of those killed in an ethereal region that became known as the Valley of the Jedi. Darth Bane survived the blast because he had deliberately positioned himself away from the weapon's range. His warnings to Khan had been motivated by self-preservation rather than concern for his fellow Sith. With the Brotherhood destroyed, Bane emerged as the sole surviving Sith Lord in the galaxy. Rather than attempting to rebuild the Sith as a visible organization, Bane implemented his Rule of Two philosophy. He took a young survivor from Ruusan named Zana as his apprentice and began training her in absolute secrecy. From this point forward, only 2 Sith would exist at any time, working in the shadows to eventually destroy the Jedi and overthrow the Republic. The devastation at Ruusan prompted the most comprehensive governmental reform in Republic history. Supreme Chancellor Tarsus Valorum convened the Galactic Senate to restructure the entire political system and prevent future wars of this magnitude. The Ruusan reformations dismantled the Republic's central military authority, disbanding the armies that had fought in the new Sith Wars and decommissioning most of the naval forces. The Jedi Order, blamed by some politicians for prolonging the conflict, was reorganized and placed under strict Senate oversight. The Republic itself was repartitioned into over 1,000 regional sectors, each represented by a single senator to streamline governance. The position of Supreme Chancellor was deliberately weakened to prevent any future leader from accumulating the kind of power that had enabled the new Sith Wars to continue for so long. These reforms marked the end of what we've been calling the Old Republic era throughout our timeline. The government that emerged from Ruusan was fundamentally different from the one that had existed for over 24,000 years. This new system would become known as the modern Galactic Republic. With the Sith believed extinct and the Jedi relegated to peacekeeping, the galaxy entered an age of stability. The great peace of the Republic would last for a full millennium, longer than any previous period of galactic tranquility. But the Republic's leaders had no idea that their greatest victory had actually planted the seeds of their ultimate defeat. Darth Bane's rule of two created a Sith tradition that was far more dangerous than the armies and empires that had come before. Instead of trying to conquer the galaxy through force, the Sith would corrupt it from within. For the next 1,000 years, a succession of Sith masters and apprentices worked in absolute secrecy to infiltrate Republic institutions, manipulate political processes, and position themselves for the moment when they could reveal themselves and seize control. Each generation built upon the work of their predecessors, guided by patience and planning rather than the reckless ambition that had destroyed previous Sith movements. The Benite Sith, as historians would later call them, understood that their enemy was not just the Jedi Order, but the democratic principles that the Republic represented. They would need to make the galaxy choose authoritarianism willingly, believing that freedom was too dangerous and that only a strong central authority could provide security. This plan would finally come to fruition when Darth Sidious and Darth Vader overthrew the Republic, exactly 1,000 years after the Ruusan Reformation. The revenge of the Sith that began with Darth Bane's survival would culminate in the establishment of the Galactic Empire and the near extinction of the Jedi Order. The Old Republic timeline that began with the Jedi seeking balance on Tython ended with the Sith achieving the victory that had eluded them for over 25,000 years. Every conflict we've explored, from the Force Wars to the Great Hyperspace War, to the Mandalorian Wars, to the Jedi Civil War, contributed to this final outcome. The patterns established in those ancient conflicts would repeat until the very end. Force users turning against their own traditions, heroes becoming villains, the constant tension between order and freedom, peace and justice, individual power and collective responsibility. These themes that defined the Old Republic era would continue to shape galactic civilization long after the Republic itself had fallen. The Old Republic lasted for over 25,000 years, longer than most species exist, longer than most stars burn. It survived the rise and fall of multiple Sith Empires, weathered schisms and civil wars, and adapted to threats that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. Its ultimate defeat came not through external conquest, but through internal corruption, proving that democracy's greatest enemy is often democracy itself. As we conclude our exploration of the Old Republic timeline, we can see that this ancient era established the foundation for everything that followed in galactic history. The Old Republic is gone, but its legacy lives on in every choice between light and dark, every decision between selfishness and sacrifice, Every moment when someone must decide whether to stand up for what's right or accept what's easy.